Previously on Divine Blood.
A Saiyan pod drifted through the void. The Grand Priest caught it and raised the boy as his own, Goku, a mortal carrying divine ki and Saiyan blood, something that was never supposed to exist. He left the divine realm so he could explore. His brother Raditz found him, broke free from Frieza's empire, stood between a tyrant and his little brother, and died a free Saiyan so Goku could live. Goku carried that grief straight into Frieza's empire and found Vegeta. Two Saiyans against an empire, and when Frieza tried to kill Vegeta, Goku refused to lose another brother. The dual ki stabilized, the gold held. Goku turned Super Saiyan, and Frieza retreated for the first time in his life. They found the Saiyan Heritage Core, a prophecy. A Saiyan born between mortal and divine blood will either save the universe or destroy it. Caulifla and Kale have breached Universe 7, just as the indomitable Jiren descends to judge whether Goku's divine power is a miracle or a cosmic mistake. Amidst the chaos, the feral powerhouse Broly makes planetfall, and only Goku can tame him. As Vegeta ascends to the Violet Super Saiyan Sovereign, the horrifying truth bleeds out. Their combined power is thinning the fabric of reality. The Eclipsed are scratching at the cracks, and Daishinkan hides a soul-crushing secret. To save the multiverse, a willing sacrifice must be made. The cracks are widening. Super Saiyan 3 didn't save Goku. It almost destroyed reality, because his own power was building the enemy's door. So he went deeper instead of higher, broke a biological lock that Zeno placed on all Saiyans, and achieved Super Saiyan 4, and unchained his entire race. Welcome to the final chapter of Dragon Ball Divine Blood. 3 months of silence. 3 months since the Eclipse withdrew from the multiverse's wounds, like a tide pulling back from the shore. Not retreating, not defeated, but gathering. The Coalition used every hour of that silence the way soldiers use the night before a siege, sharpening, preparing, pretending that readiness could substitute for certainty. Across 11 universes, the wounds remained, narrow slits in reality's fabric, monitored by rotating pillar shifts, held in check by the sustained effort of warriors who slept in shifts and trained in the hours between. The multiverse was not at peace. It was holding its breath. Goku trained daily in SSJ-4, pushing the form's limits on the barren moon that had become the Coalition's proving ground. Red fur blazing, golden eyes burning, his Uzaru biology resonating with reality's fabric. Each session extended his peak duration, refined his control, deepened the connection between his identity and the seal. He could hold SSJ-4 for 90 seconds now at full output, and in that window he was the most effective seal reinforcer the Coalition possessed. But 90 seconds was a window, not a wall, and the Eclipse Sovereign's final words echoed through every training session like a heartbeat beneath the silence. You are mortal. You will die. We have forever. After a session that left him drained and sitting in a crater of his own making, Goku spoke the truth he had been circling for weeks. Whis sat beside him, staff across his knees, the angel's composure a thin shell over the worry that lived behind his eyes. It's not enough, Goku said. SSJ-4 is the strongest I've ever been, the most myself I've ever been, and it's not enough. Whis did not argue. He had run the calculations. They both knew. The Saiyan River is at full flood, Whis said carefully. You have mastered what you are, but you have not mastered what you were raised to be. Goku looked at him. The angelic side. Whis nodded. Ultra instinct. The river you absorbed as a child in Father's palace. It lives in your body. I've seen it surface in micro-flickers during your deepest SSJ-4 sessions. Your muscles remember. Your mind blocks the memory. Goku stared at his hands that had held the Uzaru's primal fire and compressed it into mortal form. Hands that had been small once, toddler small, reaching for a giant who walked these same corridors with the most perfect movement in existence. I need to go back to the palace, he said. I need him. Whis' expression softened. The angel who had watched a child grow into a warrior, watching the warrior realize he still needed his father. Yes, you do. In the solitude of Zeno's palace, Daishinkan stood before his private console. The data streams were familiar. Seal integrity readings, wound measurements, eclipsed activity patterns. But the file beneath them was not data. It was Protocol Father. He had refined it 914 times now. Each refinement brought the mathematics closer to certainty, and the Grand Minister closer to the decision he had been approaching since the war began. The protocol was elegant in its simplicity. Daishinkan would enter the void side of the boundary, the Eclipse territory, and anchor the seal from within using his divine essence. Not dissolution, imprisonment, an eternal, solitary existence in the space between nothing and everything, his divine will pressing against the void's pressure from the inside, while the mortal pillars pressed from the outside. 2 hands on a sheet of glass. The seal would hold forever. The cost was one angel's eternal isolation. He closed the file when the communication alert chimed. Goku's voice, familiar and warm and carrying the weight of a universe. Father, I need to come home. I need to learn what you never taught me. Daishinkan touched the console. Closed protocol father. Not deleted. Closed. The way you close a door, you know you will walk through, but not yet. Not while there are still hours left to spend with the person you are leaving behind. Come, Kakarot. I have been waiting. While Goku prepared to depart for the palace, Caulifla trained on the resistance world with a ferocity that had drawn comment from every member of the coalition. Her blaze burned hotter. Her crimson thread technique wove tighter. Her sparring sessions lasted longer and hit harder than any period in her training history. She was relentless, up before dawn, training through meals, pushing until her body gave out, and then pushing past that. Kale watched from the sidelines with the concern of a sister who recognized the difference between determination and desperation. You're going to burn yourself out, Kale said during a water break that Caulifla had not requested and did not want. I'm fine. You're not fine. You haven't been fine for weeks. Something changed. Caulifla drank the water, said nothing. Something had changed. She could feel it every morning. The shift in her ki, the warmth that was not hers, the second heartbeat so faint it could be mistaken for an echo. She had counted the days. She had done the math. The Universe 6 visit, the rooftop, the sunset, the night after the sunset, when the alien stars of her home universe watched two Saiyans choose each other with the totality that only Saiyans understood. She confirmed it alone, in a locked room, ki sense fully open, every barrier dropped. Her awareness turned inward, with the precision of a warrior reading a battlefield. The second heartbeat was there, not an echo, not a fluctuation, but a presence, tiny, unformed, a key signature that had never existed in any universe, flickering like a candle flame in a body built for bonfires. Gold threads and silver threads and crimson threads, women together in a pattern that was neither hers nor Goku's, but something that could only have come from both. She placed both hands on her stomach. Her face moved through shock, through terror, through wonder, and landed where Caulifla's face always landed, on defiance. She set her jaw, she clenched her fists, and she said, to the tiny presence inside her, the first words it would ever hear from its mother, "You picked a hell of a time, kid, but you're mine, and nobody, not the void, not the gods, not the whole damn multiverse, is going to touch you. That's a promise." She did not tell Goku. He was leaving for the palace, leaving to unlock the transformation that might save reality. If he knew, he would stay. He would choose her and the baby over the mission, because that is who Goku was. A man who chose people over power, every time, without hesitation. And she loved him for it, and she would not let him make that choice. Not now. Not when the universe needed him to be more than a father. She would carry this weight alone, for now, the way she carried everything, with fire and will, and the absolute refusal to let anyone else determine her path. She told one person, Whis. The communication was private, encrypted beyond mortal detection, conducted in the small hours when the resistance world slept, and the angel stood vigil over the Pillar Network's readings. Whis answered immediately. Angels did not sleep, and Whis had not rested in the conventional sense since the war began. Caulifla's face appeared in the hologram, and Whis knew before she spoke. The shift in her key was subtle, but unmistakable to an angel's perception. A harmonic variation, a second frequency nested within the first, the biological signature of new life. How long have you known? Whis asked. Weeks. The child's key signature is unformed, undefined, a soul in the process of becoming. I know what it is, Whis. I don't need a diagnosis. I need someone I trust to keep a secret and keep this baby safe. Whis was quiet for a moment. Two secrets now. Protocol father and a pregnancy. The angel who was made to serve was choosing to carry the weight of love for two people who were each trying to protect the other by keeping the truth hidden. Why not tell Goku? Caulifla's jaw tightened in the hologram. Because he'll choose me over the mission, and the mission is the universe. I won't let him sacrifice everything because I'm carrying his kid. Not yet. He will need to know. Before the Pillar Network activates fully, I know. Let me choose the moment. Whis closed his eyes, nodded. I will monitor the child, and I will keep your secret. He paused. You are remarkably brave, Caulifla. I'm remarkably Saiyan. Same thing. In the deepest, most restricted chamber of Frieza's flagship, a chamber sealed by biometric locks keyed to Frieza's key signature alone, invisible to the Coalition's monitoring systems, shielded by layers of technology that the Emperor had developed specifically to hide his activities from angelic detection, the harvest continued. Rows of containment units lined the walls, each one holding a measure of extracted eclipsed essence. The substance shimmered in its containers, dark, wrong, carrying the visual weight of something that existed before light had rules. It was not ki. It was not energy in any conventional sense. It was the residue of pre-universal existence, scraped from the remains of captured Eclipse scouts and concentrated through a process that Frieza's scientists had developed through months of experimentation and a body count of test subjects that the Emperor kept in no official record. Frieza stood before the newest extraction, his absolute form's white aura casting pristine light across the dark containers. His chief scientist, a French Saiyan named Sorel, brilliant and terrified in equal measure, delivered the latest report with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned that enthusiasm invited scrutiny and failure invited death. The yield has increased by 14% since the last collection. We now possess enough concentrated essence for a full absorption attempt. Frieza studied the containers. His reflection stared back from the dark glass. White, pristine, absolute. The test subjects, all deceased. The essence consumed their identity within seconds. No mortal organism in our trials can contain it. The void energy attacks the sense of self. It strips personality, memory, consciousness. What remains is a body running on base instinct until even that degrades. Frieza's smile was thin enough to cut. They died because they were uncertain. They carried doubt in their biology, the mortal weakness of questioning whether one deserves to exist. He placed his palm flat against the container. The dark essence inside pulsed once, as if recognizing the proximity of something that interested it. I have never questioned my existence. Not once. Not for a single heartbeat in my entire life. The void cannot erase what has never wavered. Sorrel swallowed. My lord, the risk is mine. Continue the extraction. Increase the yield. When the moment arrives, I will absorb it all, and I will become what the universe has always needed and always feared. Power with perfect certainty. The void made flesh, wearing my face, answering to my name. His eyes reflected the dark shimmer. The Emperor had a plan, and, as with all of Frieza's plans, it was simultaneously the most brilliant and the most catastrophic idea anyone had ever conceived. Goku arrived at Zeno's palace through a dimensional corridor that Whis crafted personally, a clean passage, direct and precise, depositing him in the entrance hall he had walked as a child. The palace was unchanged. It was always unchanged. Eternal architecture built by beings for whom time was a unit of measurement rather than a force of nature. The same white marble, the same infinite corridors, the same silence that was not empty but full, filled with the accumulated stillness of a place where the universe's architect had lived for longer than the concept of living had existed. Goku walked the familiar halls and felt the years collapse. Not nostalgia, not memory, but something deeper. His body recognized this place the way blood recognizes a heartbeat, automatic, ancestral. His footsteps fell into a rhythm he did not consciously choose, the rhythm of a child following his father through corridors that had no end. Daishinkan met him at the training chamber, the same chamber where a 3-year-old Kakarot had first learned to channel ki, sitting cross-legged on a floor that reflected infinity, struggling to hold a stance that the Grand Minister demonstrated with the effortless perfection of a being who had never struggled with anything physical in 11 billion years. They regarded each other across the chamber's threshold. Goku saw his father, older than the concept of age, carrying a weight that was invisible to everyone except the people who loved him. Daishinkan saw his son, taller than the last time, broader, the boy's frame replaced by a warrior's, but the eyes the same. The same dark eyes that had looked up at him from a cracked pod and changed everything. "You've grown," Daishinkan said. Goku almost smiled. "You say that every time." "It is true every time." A pause. "Ultra instinct, Kakarot. That is why you've come." "Yes. I cannot teach it to you." The words landed like stones in water. Goku's face fell. "Then why?" "I cannot teach it because it was never a lesson. Ultra instinct is not a technique. It is a way of being. The body moving in perfect concert with reality, without the interference of conscious thought. I did not teach Whis through instruction. I taught him through presence. By being near me, his body learned to move the way mine moves. The knowledge transferred through proximity, the way a child learns a parent's walk, a parent's gestures, a parent's way of standing in a room. He stepped into the chamber. You absorbed this knowledge before you could speak, walking behind me in these corridors, mimicking my steps. Your body learned the rhythm of angelic movement through the most natural method in existence, a son following his father. Goku stared. It's already in me. It has been in you since you were 3 years old. Your mind has been blocking it. The weight of identity, of Saiyan versus Angel, of which river you belong to. You have spent years agonizing over the difference between what you were born as and what you were raised to be. That agony is the wall. Ultra instinct lives on the other side. The training began, and it was not training. Daishinkan simply moved. He walked through the palace performing mundane tasks with a perfection of motion that transcended the concept of efficiency and entered the territory of art, arranging objects on a shelf, each gesture the exact gesture the universe would have chosen, if the universe had hands. Turning a corner, the air parting for him before he arrived, space itself reorganizing to accommodate his passage. Ascending stairs, each step placed with the inevitability of gravity, no wasted energy, no unnecessary adjustment, the body and the environment in such total agreement that the distinction between them dissolved. Goku watched, and his body remembered, not from last month, not from last year, from the beginning. Small feet on palace tile, a toddler's unsteady steps falling into rhythm with the tallest shadow in existence. The way Daishinkan's robe moved, and the child's eyes tracked it, and the child's legs tried to match it and failed, and tried again, and slowly, over months and years, stopped failing. The mimicry had been unconscious. The absorption had been total. Every angelic movement pattern that Daishinkan embodied had been copied into Goku's muscle memory at the deepest possible level, below technique, below key manipulation, below conscious access, written into the body by the most powerful teacher in existence, using the most ancient teaching method, a parent being themselves while a child watched and learned. Hours passed. Goku followed Daishinkan through the palace, not training, not sparring, just walking, together, the way they used to, and with each hour, the wall between Goku's conscious mind and the angelic patterns in his body thinned. His steps became more fluid, his turns more economical, his breathing synchronized with the space around him in ways he did not notice, but Daishinkan did. The Grand Minister watched his son walk and saw the ghost of a toddler superimposed over the warrior's frame, the same rhythm, the same unconscious grace, perfected by time and unlocked by the simple act of being near the person who had planted it there. In Universe 7, Vegeta and Jiren maintained the central wound watch, the most critical defensive position in the Coalition's deployment. The wound was narrow but persistent, its edges pulsing with the slow rhythm of the Eclipsed's patience. Patrols were methodical, unglamorous work, hours of monitoring interrupted by brief engagements with Scout-class entities that tested the wound's edges, probing for weakness. Vegeta killed them with the efficient contempt of a prince who considered anything below commander class unworthy of his full attention. Jiren dispatched them with the measured precision of a warrior who had learned to conserve everything. During a rest period between patrols, the kind of stolen quiet that soldiers learned to use the way desert travelers used oases, Vegeta spoke without looking at Jiren. His eyes were on the wound, the thin scar in reality that he had been staring at for weeks. "When this is over," Vegeta said, "if we survive." He paused. The prince who had spent a lifetime hoarding words was spending them now with the reluctance of a miser writing a check. "I want to spar with Kakarot. A real spar. Not for the universe, not for survival, just to see who we've become." Jiren considered this with the gravity he applied to everything. "You call it a spar. In my universe, we would call it a conversation." Vegeta's mouth twitched, the closest the prince came to a smile in combat conditions. "Then I suppose I have something to say to him." Jiren looked at Vegeta, the proud, isolated, brilliant warrior who had learned to stand among others without losing himself. "I would like to hear that conversation, from a respectful distance." Vegeta almost laughed. Almost. Night fell on Zeno's palace. Not true night, since the palace existed outside conventional space-time, but a dimming that Daishinkan had programmed into the architecture centuries ago, because a human-raised Saiyan child had been afraid of perpetual light. He had built darkness into eternity for a boy who needed it to sleep. The memory of that accommodation, that small, impossible tenderness from the most powerful angel in existence, was one of the things Goku carried in his chest, like a coal that never cooled. They sat on the balcony overlooking the void between universes, the same balcony from Season 1, where a child had once asked, "What's out there?" and a Grand Minister had not known how to answer in terms a child could understand. The view was unchanged. The 12 universes spread below like luminous eggs in a nest of darkness, each one carrying the light of trillions of souls. 11 of them now. One gap where Universe 6 had been, healed over by the seal but visible as a dimness, an absence, a missing tooth in reality's smile. "Father," Goku said, "can I ask you something?" "You may." "When you found me in the pod when I was a baby, what did you feel?" The question had been asked before, in different forms, at different ages. Daishinkan had answered it differently each time, with clinical detachment when Goku was young, with measured honesty as he grew, with increasing vulnerability as the war stripped away the layers of angelic composure that had accumulated over eons. Tonight, he answered it completely. "Curiosity. Your power signature was anomalous. Your Saiyan biology was compatible with angelic ki absorption in ways I had never observed. You were a scientific phenomenon in a cracked pod. Goku waited. He knew there was more. There was always more with Daishinkan. The Grand Minister's truths were layered like geological strata. You had to dig past the surface to find what mattered. And then you cried, Daishinkan continued. And the sound was, I had not heard crying in Zeno's palace. Not in 11 billion years. The palace does not produce crying. It produces silence and obedience, and the hum of architecture maintaining itself. Your crying was the most disruptive sound the palace had ever contained. He paused, and I wanted it to continue. I wanted to hear what happened after the crying. I wanted to know what the next sound would be. He looked at his son. The next sound was laughter. You laughed at the stars. You were 3 years old and you laughed at the stars, and I realized I had been maintaining the stars for 11 billion years without ever finding them amusing. You taught me that they were funny. I still do not understand why, but I believe you. Goku's eyes filled. He did not cry, but his key shifted. Something deep and old and warm, the foundation of trust, the bedrock on which a child builds their understanding of the world. And now? He asked. Now I feel fear, every day, that the universe will take you from me before I can give you everything I want to give you. The silence after this was not the palace's silence, it was theirs. A father and son, sitting on a balcony overlooking everything, holding the specific quiet that exists between people who love each other and know that love is not enough to prevent loss. Goku slept in his old room. The bed was the same, too short now, his feet hanging off the end, but the blanket carried a smell that was not quite memory and not quite imagination. The wall still bore the faint marks where a growing child had measured his height in scratches, each one a tiny rebellion against palace rules that forbade marking eternal surfaces. Daishinkan had never repaired the scratches. In 11 billion years of maintaining perfect architecture, these were the only imperfections he had chosen to keep. Daishinkan stood outside the door, the same position, the same gesture, hand raised, not quite touching the surface, hovering in the space between reaching and restraining. Inside, his son slept. Outside, Protocol Father waited. The mathematics had not changed. 914 refinements, and the answer was always the same. The seal required divine essence on the void side, and the Grand Minister's essence was the most refined in existence. He could hold the boundary from inside the void forever. The cost was his existence as a person, not death, but eternal isolation in the space between nothing and everything, pressing against the void's pressure with his divine will, while his children pressed from the other side. 2 hands on a sheet of glass. The glass would hold forever. 1 hand would never touch anything else again. He whispered to the door, I have calculated 914 solutions. In all of them, I enter the void and you remain. In none of them do I regret it. He lowered his hand. Sleep well, Kakarot. Tomorrow, I teach you the last thing I have to give. He walked away. The corridor swallowed his footsteps. The palace returned to silence. And behind the door, in a bed too short for him, a Saiyan warrior slept the sleep of a child who knew, on some level deeper than consciousness, that his father was standing guard. Across the multiverse, the wounds pulsed once, simultaneously, in perfect unison. Not an attack, not a message, a feeling, pressed into reality's fabric by something vast and patient. The feeling was not words. It was not intent. It was the sensation of patience transforming into purpose, of waiting ending, of a tide that had pulled back beginning to return. Every key sensitive being in 11 universes felt it, a shiver, a wrongness, the cosmic equivalent of the air pressure dropping before a storm. Whis felt it in Universe 7, and his staff flickered. Jiren felt it at the wound, and his meditation broke. Vegeta felt it, and his sovereign aura erupted involuntarily. Caulifla felt it on the resistance world, and her hand went to her stomach. Frieza felt it in his restricted chamber and smiled. The silence was ending, the storm was coming, and the coalition had weeks, not months, to prepare for what was on the other side. Morning in the palace. Goku rose and found Daishinkan already in the training chamber, standing at its center, motionless, his angelic aura at absolute rest, the most powerful being in the room indistinguishable from a statue. The chamber had been reconfigured overnight, all furnishings removed, the floor polished to a mirror surface, the walls expanded to create a space so vast that Goku's footsteps echoed for seconds before fading. It was a room designed for one thing: movement without obstruction. Today, Daishinkan said without turning, you will fight me. Goku's heartbeat spiked. In the entire history of their relationship, from infancy through childhood, through adolescence, through war, Daishinkan had never invited combat. He had demonstrated, he had corrected, he had observed, but he had never stood across from his son and said, fight me. Not to win, Daishinkan clarified, sensing the spike in Goku's ki. Not to test your power. You will fight me to let your body answer without your mind's permission. I will move at angelic speed. Your conscious mind cannot track angelic speed. It processes too slowly, filters too much, inserts too many decisions between perception and response. But your body can. Your body has been tracking angelic movement since you were 3 years old. It learned the patterns. It memorized the rhythms. It knows where I will be before I am there, because it spent a decade watching me and encoding every motion into its deepest memory. Daishinkan raised one hand. When I move, do not think. Do not strategize. Do not access SSJ4 or any transformation. Stand in your base form, the form closest to the child who learned this, and let your body do what it has always known how to do. Trust the training you do not remember receiving. He settled into a stance that was not a stance. Angelic combat had no stances, because stances implied preparation, and Ultra Instinct did not prepare. It responded. Ready? Goku breathed, dropped his guard, let his arms hang, closed his eyes, opened them. Base form. No golden aura, no red fur, no lightning. Just a Saiyan in the body his mother gave him, standing in the room where his father taught him to walk. Ready. Daishinkan moved. The word moved was insufficient. He translated from one position to another with the instantaneous precision of a being who had been navigating space since before space was finalized. His hand descended toward Goku's shoulder at a speed that no mortal eye could track, no mortal mind could process, no mortal body should have been able to. Goku's body shifted, not dodged, not blocked, shifted, a lateral displacement of exactly the distance required, executed with zero wasted motion, his torso rotating on an axis that his conscious mind had not chosen. His eyes were wide with shock, his mouth open to speak, but Daishinkan was already moving again. A sequence of strikes, each one angelic speed, each one arriving from angles that required predictive modeling beyond mortal cognitive capacity. Goku's body answered each one. Not perfectly, his footwork stuttered on the third dodge, his balance wavered on the fifth, and the seventh strike clipped his forearm because his shoulder had not fully committed to the rotation. But the pattern was there. Underneath the imperfections, beneath the mortal limitations, the pattern was unmistakable. His body knew this dance. It had learned it from the inside, by spending its formative years in the presence of the partner. Daishinkan increased the speed. Goku's conscious mind dropped away. Not erased, like SSJ3's terrible emptiness, but simply outpaced. His thoughts could not keep up with his body's responses, and so they stopped trying. The way a passenger stops trying to drive when they realize the car knows the road better than they do. His muscles fired in sequences he had never trained. His feet found positions he had never practiced. His breathing synchronized with the space around him in a rhythm that was not Saiyan, not quite angelic, but something that could only have been born from a lifetime of proximity to both. His eyes flickered, silver, at the edges, just for a moment, just a flash. Daishinkan saw it and pressed harder, faster, more complex, combinations that required not just reactive movement, but predictive positioning, the body knowing where the next strike would land before the striker decided to throw it. Goku's mind screamed to activate SSJ4. The Saiyan blood roared. Fight harder, push further, meet force with force, climb the mountain. But underneath the roar, quieter, patient, the voice that was not a voice, but a feeling. Feet on palace tile, a shadow to follow, the turn of a robe, the rhythm of a walk that the universe itself accommodated. Trust it, trust him. Trust the man who caught you when you fell, and taught you to stand, and stood outside your door, and never left. Goku's eyes flashed silver, full silver, both eyes. For 7 seconds, his body moved with a fluidity that transcended mortal capability. Not fast, not powerful, but inevitable. Each of Daishinkan's angelic speed strikes found empty air, not because Goku dodged, because Goku was already where the strikes were not, had been there before the decision to strike was complete, his body reading the architecture of combat the way his father read the architecture of reality. 7 seconds. Then it collapsed. His conscious mind surged back, disrupted the flow, and Daishinkan's next strike caught him clean across the chest and sent him sliding across the mirrored floor. Goku lay on his back, gasping, staring at the ceiling, and laughing. Not the laugh of triumph, the laugh of recognition, of finding something you lost so long ago you forgot you were missing it. 7 seconds, he breathed. I felt it the whole time. My body just went, like it was remembering a song. Daishinkan stood over him. The Grand Minister's composure was intact, because angelic composure was structural rather than performative. But his eyes, his ancient, careful, 11 billion-year-old eyes, were shining. 7 seconds, Daishinkan confirmed. The angelic river surfaced for 7 seconds. Your body moved with ultra instinct, not as a technique activated through will, but as a memory unlocked through trust. He extended his hand. Goku took it, was pulled to his feet. Again, Goku said. Again, Daishinkan agreed. They trained through the day. Each session pushed the duration longer. 7 seconds became 9, became 11, became 14. Each session refined the trigger, the mental state that allowed the body's memory to surface past the mind's interference. It was not emptiness, like meditation traditions taught. It was not suppression of self, like angelic orthodoxy prescribed. It was trust. The specific, biological trust of a child for a parent. The conviction, held deeper than thought, that the person who raised you taught you right, that the patterns they placed in your body were good patterns, that letting go of control was not losing yourself, but finding the self that existed before you were old enough to doubt. By evening, Goku could sustain UI sign for 20 seconds in controlled conditions. The movement was unmistakable, silver-white aura, calm and absolute, the body navigating combat with autonomous precision. But the limitation was equally clear. In UI, the angelic river dominated. The Saiyan river quieted. Goku became untouchable. No strike could reach him, no attack could find purchase, but his offensive output dropped dramatically. His strikes were precise, but carried no weight. No Saiyan fire, no primal force, no emotional power. He could evade everything and hurt nothing. The angelic river alone was a shield without a sword. This is half the answer, Goku said, sitting on the training chamber floor, his body trembling with the specific exhaustion of muscles that had been used in patterns they were still remembering. Daishinkan sat across from him, an image that would have been impossible to imagine a decade ago. The Grand Minister sitting on a floor, cross-legged, facing his son like an equal rather than a creation. Yes, Daishinkan agreed. Ultra Instinct is the angelic river at full flood. It is complete in itself. Perfect defense, perfect evasion, perfect movement. But you are not an angel. You are a Saiyan raised by an angel. The angelic river alone leaves you incomplete. Goku nodded slowly. SSJ4 is perfect offense, total identity. The Saiyan river at full flood. And UI is perfect defense, total flow. The angelic river at full flood. His eyes held the clarity of someone who could see the shape of the answer without being able to touch it. I need both at the same time, not switching, not alternating. Both rivers, full flood, simultaneously. Daishinkan regarded him with an expression that was not quite pride and not quite fear, somewhere between the two, in the space where parents watch their children approach the edge of something irreversible. Yes, but that is not something I can teach you. The convergence of two rivers is not a technique. It is a state of being that only exists when both rivers have been fully mastered independently, and the person carrying them stops believing they are separate. He paused. You are not there yet, but you are closer than anyone has ever been. In Universe 7, the wound pulsed twice. Jiren reported, they are building again. The structures beyond the wound, they are larger, more organized. This is not preparation. This is staging. Vegeta confirmed from his position. The scouts have changed their behavior. They are no longer probing. They are measuring, calculating distances, timing responses. They are studying our defensive patterns. The implications were stark. The Eclipsed were preparing a coordinated assault based on intelligence gathered during their 3 months of apparent silence. The withdrawal had not been retreat, it had been reconnaissance. On the Resistance world, the Coalition received the tactical update, and the temperature of every conversation dropped. Caulifla processed the information while running Crimson Thread drills with the surviving Universe 6 Saiyan refugees, a small group, fighters and civilians, who had been visiting Universe 7 when the war began and could not return home. They looked to Caulifla as their leader, their connection to the universe they had been separated from. She bore the weight without showing it. But at night, alone, her hand found her stomach, and the weight was there. The baby, the war, the universe, the secret, the future, pressing against the present with the insistence of something that would not wait. Frieza received the same update and processed it through an entirely different calculus. Eclipsed invasion imminent. Coalition forces stretched thin. Defensive positions compromised by the Pillar Network's known limitations. In the chaos of a full-scale invasion, attention would fragment, monitoring would lapse, and in that window of distraction, an emperor could do what emperors did, seize power while the world burned. He did not accelerate his timeline, he simply confirmed it. The absorption would occur during the invasion's peak chaos, when every eye was on the wounds, and no eye was on his flagship. The containers gleamed in the restricted chamber's light. Frieza's reflection gleamed with them. The final day in the palace arrived not with ceremony, but with the quiet of a morning that both father and son knew was the last of its kind. Daishinkan had prepared the garden, the same garden where a 3-year-old Kakarot had first learned key purity, sitting among alien flowers that bloomed in patterns synchronized with reality's fundamental frequencies. The flowers were unchanged. They would bloom for another 11 billion years, indifferent to the war raging in the universes below. But the boy who had sat among them was a man now, and the man carried 2 rivers inside him that had never flowed together. And today, one of those rivers would either reach its full capacity or remain forever incomplete. Today is different, Daishinkan said. They stood in the garden's center, a circular clearing of white stone surrounded by the impossible flowers, the air carrying a frequency that settled the nervous system and clarified perception. Yesterday, you fought me to let your body remember. Today, you fight me to let your body commit. There is a difference between accessing a memory and making it permanent. What you have now is a door that opens for 20 seconds and closes. What you need is a door that stays open. The spar began. Daishinkan moved at full angelic combat speed, faster than the previous sessions. The gloves removed, the Grand Minister engaging his son with the totality of his movement capacity, short of lethal force. The strikes came from everywhere and nowhere, above, below, lateral, diagonal, combinations that folded through spatial dimensions that mortal senses could barely perceive. Goku's body answered. UI sign activated within the first exchange. Silver eyes, silver white aura, the body moving on its own, navigating the angelic assault with the accumulated memory of a lifetime of observation. 20 seconds, 25, 30. But Daishinkan was not just attacking, he was communicating. Every strike was an invitation. Every combination was a phrase in a language that only a body could hear, the language of angelic movement, spoken between parent and child, transmitted through combat the way other families transmitted through embrace. Follow me, the way you used to, when you were small, when you didn't know there was a difference between Saiyan and Angel, when you just moved because I moved and the universe was that simple. Goku's body heard and followed, and for the first time, the following was not reactive, but predictive. His body did not wait for Daishinkan's strikes to arrive and then evade. It knew where Daishinkan would be. It knew the Grand Minister's movement language, the way a musician knows a song they learned in childhood, complete, internalized, woven into the neurons. He began to move before Daishinkan moved, not faster, earlier. The distinction was everything. Daishinkan felt it, the shift from reaction to anticipation, from memory to mastery, and his composure cracked. Not broke, cracked, the way a shell cracks when something inside it has grown too large to be contained. His son was not merely accessing ultra instinct, he was becoming it. The angelic movement pattern was no longer a borrowed memory surfacing temporarily. It was integrating, permanently, irrevocably, into the body of a Saiyan warrior, fusing with his mortal nervous system, becoming as natural as breathing. This was what Zeno had feared. A mortal who could move like an angel not through divine gift, but through the most human mechanism in existence. A child learning from a parent. Goku's eyes blazed silver. Full silver, complete, not flickering, not fading, not fighting for control against the Saiyan instincts that had previously overwhelmed them. The silver was absolute, the angelic river at full flood, flowing through a body that trusted it completely, that had stopped questioning whether it belonged there. His movement became the movement, not Goku moving through space, space moving through Goku, the universe adjusting itself to accommodate his passage, the way it adjusted itself to accommodate Daishinkan's, because the body had learned the same language, spoken it fluently, and the universe recognized a native speaker. Daishinkan stopped. He stood motionless in the garden's center and watched his son move, not fighting now, just moving, flowing through the garden space with the autonomous grace of a body that had fully committed to a pattern it learned in infancy. The silver-white aura was calm, absolute, beautiful. Goku's face within it was, for the first time, at peace. Not empty, not suppressed, at peace. The mind had not been overridden. It had stepped back, willingly, trustingly, the way a passenger trusts a driver who knows the road. Goku stopped. The UI did not collapse. It settled, like a flame finding its natural resting state, burning without effort, present without strain. He stood in the garden, silver-eyed, silver-aura'd, and looked at his father. "It's not going away," he said, wonder in his voice. "It's just there, like it was always there, like it was always supposed to be there." Daishinkan's smile broke through his composure, full, open, unguarded. The smile of a father watching his son stand for the first time all over again. 11 billion years of architectural perfection, and this imperfect, mortal, stubborn, impossible Saiyan boy was the most beautiful thing he had ever maintained. Ultra Instinct, mastered, Daishinkan said. Not as a technique, as a part of you, permanently accessible. The angelic river, at full flood, integrated into your body for the rest of your life. He stepped forward, placed his hand on Goku's shoulder. The touch was warm. Angels were not supposed to be warm. I am proud of you, Kakarot, more than you will ever understand, more than I have the language to express. Goku's silver eyes filled with tears that the UI did not prevent, because Ultra Instinct was not the absence of emotion. It was the body moving perfectly, while the heart felt everything. Thank you, Father, for the corridors, for the shadows to follow, for being there every time I needed a rhythm to match. He placed his hand over Daishinkan's. I'm not going to let the universe take you from me either. You know that, right? Whatever happens, whatever the seal needs, whatever protocol, you've been hiding from me. Daishinkan flinched, micro-flinch, angelic composure reasserting itself over shock. But Goku caught it, the Saiyan instincts and the angelic perception working together to read the smallest tells on the most controlled face in existence. Yeah, Goku said quietly. I know you're planning something. I don't know what, but I know the look. It's the same look Raditz had before he died. The same look Bardock must have had when he put me in that pod. It's the look of someone who's already decided to leave. Daishinkan said nothing. His hand trembled on Goku's shoulder. Don't, Goku said. Whatever it is, don't. We find another way, together. The Grand Minister looked at his son, at the silver-eyed, angelic-mastered, Saiyan-hearted warrior who had just read through 11 billion years of composure like it was tissue paper. Together, Daishinkan repeated. It was not a promise. It was not a lie. It was the word a father says when he does not want to break his child's heart in this specific moment, even though the mathematics remain unchanged and the answer is still the same. Goku let the UI settle to its resting state, present but not active, the silver fading from his eyes but remaining accessible, a river that had been dammed and was now flowing free. He deactivated it not through effort but through relaxation, the way you stop flexing a muscle. It would be there when he needed it, always. He walked to the balcony one last time, looked out at the 11 luminous universes and the gap where Universe 6 used to be. I need to go back, he said. The others need me, and I need... He stopped, corrected. I need to see Caulifla. Something in his voice when he said her name. Daishinkan heard it. Not just love, but urgency. The urgency of a man who senses that the world is about to change and wants to hold the people he loves before it does. Go, Daishinkan said. Your angelic river is complete. When the time comes to merge it with your Saiyan river, I cannot help you with that. That convergence is yours alone to find. But I believe you will find it, because you have always been the answer to a question I did not know I was asking. Goku departed. Daishinkan watched from the balcony until the dimensional corridor closed behind his son. Then he turned, walked to his console, opened Protocol Father, read it one more time. The mathematics had not changed. They never changed. He closed the file, touched his chest, the pendant, the twin of Goku's, warm against the place where a heart would be if angels had hearts the way mortals did. Together, he said to the empty room. And the room did not answer, because rooms built for eternity did not know how to hold the weight of a word spoken by someone who meant it and could not keep it. On the Resistance world, the eclipsed wounds across the multiverse pulsed 3 times in rapid succession. The Coalition's monitoring system screamed. Whis' staff blazed with data. Vados's calculations, running continuously since her redemption, produced a result she had been dreading. Convergence in 9 days. All wounds will reach simultaneous peak instability in 9 days. The Eclipsed have synchronized their push. This is not a probe. This is the invasion. 9 days. The Coalition had 9 days to activate the Pillar Network at full power, deploy every warrior, prepare every defense, and pray that the wall they had built from will and conviction and biological evolution could hold against an ocean of pre-universal entities that had been waiting since before time had a name. Goku arrived on the Resistance world and felt the change immediately. The tension, the urgency, the particular vibration of a military force shifting from preparation to deployment. He found Caulifla in the training yard, running drills with a ferocity that even by her standards was extraordinary. Her blaze burned with a quality he had not seen before, hotter, denser, more protective, as if the fire that named itself had found something new to name itself for. He watched her for a moment before she noticed him, the way she moved, the way her hand touched her midsection between sets, a gesture so brief it could be mistaken for a stretch, but Goku's UI-enhanced perception caught it, caught the gesture, caught the protective instinct behind it, caught something he could not yet name, but that his Saiyan biology, the pack bond, the primal recognition of family, was already processing below the level of conscious thought. She saw him. Their eyes met across the training yard. She stopped. He crossed the distance. They stood face to face, and the war and the Pillar Network and the 9-day countdown existed on the other side of a boundary that they had built between themselves and everything else. A boundary made of stolen sunsets and the specific silence of two people who had chosen each other across the furthest distance in existence. "You look different," she said. "The eyes." Goku's eyes held flecks of silver now, even in base form, a permanent mark of UI integration, the angelic river visible beneath the surface. "I found it," he said. "The angelic river. It's mine now, permanently." Caulifla studied his face, read the change, saw the fluidity in his stance, the impossible calm beneath his Saiyan energy, the two rivers coexisting in a single body without conflict. "You're close," she said, "not to the form, to something else, to everything." "Yeah," he said, "I'm close." 7 days until convergence. The coalition convened on the barren moon for the formal activation of the Pillar Network at full combat capacity. This was the moment the entire alliance had been building toward. Every pillar at maximum output, every connection live, every declaration spoken with the absolute conviction of warriors who understood that the words they spoke were not ceremony, but architecture. The seal would hold or fail based on what happened in this chamber. Each pillar took position in the formation, a geometric arrangement designed by Whis and Vados to maximize resonance between nodes and minimize interference. 7 positions, 7 declarations, 7 souls asserting the right of individuality to exist. Jiren stepped forward first. His full power hummed beneath his skin. The greatest mortal combat force in the multiverse, held in check by a will that had learned to serve rather than dominate. His declaration carried the weight of a man who had rebuilt himself from the inside out. "I was alone. I chose to no longer be alone. That choice cannot be unmade." The conviction node activated. The seal resonated. Broly stepped forward. His massive frame radiated controlled warmth. The wild Saiyan who had found peace not through suppression, but through acceptance. "I was afraid of what I am. Someone showed me I could be more. I will not forget." The resilience node activated. The seal deepened. Kale stepped forward. Her berserker aura flickered green at the edges. Power and precision in perfect balance. The woman who had found her own voice by learning to control her own storm. "I hid behind someone else's strength. Then I found my own. I exist, not as a shadow." The transformation node activated. The seal flexed. Vegeta stepped forward. Sovereign violet compressed around him like gravitational armor. The prince who had learned that standing among others did not diminish his sovereignty, but defined it. "I am the prince of a dead race, and I have never been more alive. My name is Vegeta. That is enough." The weight node activated. The seal anchored. Whis stepped forward. His angelic aura shimmered with the specific quality of an eternal being who had chosen, freely, without obligation, to love mortal creatures who would outlive him only in the marks they left on his heart. "I am an angel. I was made to serve, but I chose to care. That is not my function. It is my freedom." The care node activated. The seal connected. Vados stepped forward. Her aura carried the particular density of someone who had destroyed and rebuilt themselves. The scars of revolution visible not as weakness, but as proof of survival. "I believed the answer was destruction. I was wrong. The answer is repair. I choose to build what I once tried to tear down." The precision node activated. The seal sharpened. Caulifla stepped forward last. Her blaze ignited, crimson spiral, fierce and total, the fire that had named itself burning with an intensity that made the other pillars' auras dim by comparison. Her hand, unconsciously, rested near her stomach. The gesture lasted less than a second. Only Whis noticed. Only Whis understood. She spoke her declaration with the force of a woman who meant every syllable with every cell of her body. "No one tells me what I am. I decide. And I decided to love someone, and I will burn the void itself before I let that be unmade." The will node activated. The seal blazed. The pillar network hummed to life. 7 nodes, 7 declarations, 7 irreducible individuals asserting the value of individuality against the void that wanted to erase it. The network's energy spread across the multiverse, a distributed seal reinforcement system, transmitting the combined conviction of its members into the boundary between existence and the void. Reality wounds narrowed. Breach rates dropped. The seal, strained and scarred from 2 seasons of war, strengthened measurably for the first time in months. For one shining, perfect moment, it worked. The failure began 47 seconds after activation. Whis detected it first. A flicker in the will node's output. Not a drop in power, a discontinuity. The signal from Caulifla's node carried interference. A second key signature nested within the first. Tiny, unformed, pulsing with the rhythm of a heartbeat that was not Caulifla's. The child. The unborn soul carried no declaration, no name, no formed identity. It was pure potential. A being in the process of becoming, defined not by what it was, but by what it would be. And the pillar network, designed to channel fully formed individual identities, read the child's unformed key as a paradox. A node asserting, I am someone, while simultaneously containing something that was not yet someone. The void found the gap in seconds, not through force, through logic. The boundary assertion projecting from Caulifla's node carried a space, an undefined region where individuality had not yet crystallized. And the Eclipsed, who were the masters of undifferentiation, flowed through that space the way water finds a crack in glass. The network did not shatter, it became porous. The 40% breach reduction that the 7 nodes achieved dropped to 30% within the first minute, then 20%, then 10%. The wounds began widening. Across all 11 universes, the gains reversed. The Eclipsed pushed harder, sensing weakness, exploiting the gap with the patient efficiency of an ocean finding a fracture in a dam. Whiss's face went white. Vados's calculations confirmed what his senses told him. The other pillars felt it, the network losing coherence, their individual output strong, but the collective resonance degrading. The architecture that was supposed to multiply their power instead dissipating it. Something was wrong. Something was broken, and every eye in the formation turned toward the source of the interference, toward Caulifla. The silence that followed was the most terrible silence in the Coalition's history. Caulifla felt it, the fracture in the network, the void flowing through her node, the terrible knowledge that the life inside her was the gap in the wall. Her blaze flickered, not from weakness, from the collision of two truths that could not coexist. She was the Coalition's strongest pillar, and she was the Coalition's fatal flaw. Whis spoke. He did not want to. Every second of silence was a second he hoped someone else would explain, that the data would correct itself, that the interference would resolve. It did not. The will node is compromised. His voice was steady because angelic voices were always steady, even when the being behind them was breaking. Caulifla is carrying a child. The child's key is unformed, not yet individuated. The network interprets it as a gap in the boundary assertion. The void is flowing through that gap. Silence. Absolute. Then every voice at once. Vegeta erupted first, not at Caulifla, but at the cosmos, his sovereign aura detonating with fury directed at the fundamental cruelty of a universe that turned life into liability. So life is the weakness? The thing we're fighting to protect is the thing that breaks the shield? His fist cracked the stone beneath him. Jiren processed with the speed of a mind trained for crisis. The network assumes every node is a single, fully formed soul. It was never designed for this. Kale moved to Caulifla's side instantly, physically, her berserker aura creating a protective cocoon around her friend. Not against the void, but against the weight of the revelation. Don't you dare apologize, Kale said fiercely. Broly's confusion cycled to understanding, cycled to decision in seconds. He stepped beside Caulifla physically, the largest body in the Coalition placing itself between her and any threat, real or perceived. She stays. The baby stays. Frieza's holographic presence, he had not attended in person, monitoring from his flagship, delivered the assessment that everyone was thinking and no one else would say. Remove her from the network. Replace the node. Solve the problem. The room turned hostile. Caulifla's blaze erupted at Frieza's hologram with enough force to distort the projection. I am not the problem. The network is the problem. It can't handle what I am now. That's its failure, not mine. And Goku, who had arrived on the Resistance world 3 days ago with silver flecks in his eyes and both rivers flowing inside him. Goku, who had been standing in the formation, not as a pillar, but as an observer, watching the network activate, feeling its architecture through his Uzaru-attuned senses. Goku, who had watched Caulifla's hand drift to her stomach, and not understood until this moment, until Whis' words made the connection that his conscious mind had been circling without landing on. He looked at Caulifla. She looked at him. Her expression was the one he had never seen on her. Not defiance, not fury, not confidence. Fear. The specific fear of someone who has been carrying a secret to protect the person they love and has just been exposed. The fear of being seen as a liability by the man she chose to stand beside. Will he sideline her? Will he try to protect her? Will he become someone she does not recognize? Goku walked to her, through the formation, past the other pillars, past the arguments and the fury and the strategic calculations that were already spinning in every mind in the room. He walked to Caulifla and took her hand. She gripped it, hard enough to bruise mortal bone, which his was, and the pain was welcome because it was real and hers. He turned to the room. His eyes held the silver flecks of UI integration and the gold warmth of SSJ4's mastery and the steady, undeniable calm of a man who had just received the largest piece of information of his life and had processed it in the time it took to cross a room. Nobody touches her. Nobody replaces her. We find another way. Caulifla's grip tightened. Her blaze steadied. She did not thank him. She did not need to. They were Saiyans. Later, away from the group, a corridor in the Resistance world's barracks, chosen for its distance from monitoring equipment and its proximity to nothing. Caulifla leaned against the wall. Goku stood facing her. Between them, the weight of a secret that was no longer a secret, and a war that had just lost its best defense. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd try to protect me," she said, not apologizing, explaining. Caulifla did not apologize for choices she stood behind. "I know you, Goku. I know what you do when someone you love is in danger. You throw yourself between them and the threat, every time, without thinking. And I couldn't let you do that, not now. Not when the universe needs you focused on the fight, not on me." Goku was quiet for a moment. His hand found hers again, held it. Then, gently, he moved her hand to her stomach and pressed his palm flat against the warmth beneath. He felt it, the second heartbeat, the tiny key, gold and silver and crimson, threaded together in a pattern he had never sensed before, but recognized instantly, the way you recognize your own face in a mirror you've never used. His child, their child, a new soul, woven from everything they were, carrying rivers that had never flowed together in any being before this one. His face changed, not dramatically, not with the explosive emotion of SSJ-3 or the primal surge of SSJ-4. It changed the way a landscape changes when the sun rises, gradually, totally, every shadow redefined by new light. His eyes widened, his breath caught, his hand trembled against her stomach, and he said, very quietly, with the voice of a man who has just discovered that the universe is larger than he thought, "Oh, just that, oh." Then he pulled her close and held her, and his tail wrapped around her, and for one moment, the war and the Pillar Network, and the 9-day countdown, and the Eclipsed and Protocol Father, and every weight that had been stacked on his shoulders since the day he was pulled from a cracked pod did not exist. Just a father meeting his child for the first time, through a wall of flesh and possibility, and the fierce, protective warmth of the woman who had chosen him across the furthest distance in existence. In Zeno's palace, Daishinkan felt the Pillar Network destabilized. His console screamed, the will node compromised, the breach rates climbing, the timeline collapsing from 9 days to hours. He opened Protocol Father. The mathematics were unchanged, but the context was new. The network was not going to hold. The invasion was accelerating. The seal required reinforcement from the void side, divine essence, pressing back, holding the boundary from within Eclipse territory. He had always known this moment would come. He had hoped it would come later. He had hoped, and hope was the variable that did not appear in his calculations, the variable his son had introduced into the equation of his existence. He contacted Whis on a private channel. "The network cannot hold. You know what must be done." Whis' face in the hologram was the face of someone who had been carrying this knowledge like a stone in his chest. "Father, not yet, not today, but soon. The seal requires divine essence on the void side to compensate for the mortal side's failure. I am the only being with sufficient divine authority to anchor the boundary from within. When the invasion reaches its peak, when the mortal pillars are fully engaged on the existence side, I will enter the void and hold from the other side. Permanently." Whis. Permanently. Not a question. A word spoken to hear how it sounded. It sounded like a coffin being measured. "Father, Goku has mastered Ultra Instinct. He has both rivers. If he achieves the convergence, if, the largest word in any language, I cannot stake the survival of 11 universes on if." Daishinkan's voice was gentle. The gentleness of someone who has accepted something terrible and wants to spare the people they love the weight of fighting it. "Be ready, Whis. When the time comes, I will need you to maintain the network's divine connection from the existence side. You and Vados, together. The two of you can sustain the care and precision nodes without me." Whis' composure shattered. Angels did not shatter. Whis shattered. "I will not lose you, Father." Daishinkan. "You will not lose me. I will be in the seal. In every moment the boundary holds. In every breath every mortal takes on the side of existence. I will be the reason the glass does not break." He paused. "That is not loss. That is legacy." Whis terminated the connection. He stood in the corridor of the resistance world and pressed his palm against the wall and let himself feel the thing he had been holding back since he first read Protocol Father's specifications. Grief. Preemptive, devastating, and absolute. Dawn broke over Sadala. Universe 6. The same sunrise that Goku and Caulifla had watched from the rooftop. Deep magentas bleeding into luminous golds, colors that Universe 7's sky could not produce, painted by a star that burned at frequencies unique to this corner of reality. The city stirred with the rhythms of a civilization that had never known extinction. Children running through streets, warriors training in open courtyards, an old Saiyan sitting on a porch with a cup of something warm, and the easy patience of a man who had never been told his kind was supposed to be dead. Kaba led the morning patrol, disciplined, thorough, the young soldier's attention to detail unchanged by the biological locks breaking. The Universe 6 Saiyans trained with their newly accessible Uzaru potential, their base forms humming with primal energy that felt like waking up after a lifetime of sleeping. They were stronger, they were freer. They did not yet know what the freedom would cost. The sky cracked, not metaphorically. The visual structure of Universe 6's heavens fractured along lines that followed no natural geometry, jagged, branching, spreading from the wound over Sadala like fault lines in a pane of glass struck by a stone. Through the fractures, the raw lattice of reality was visible, shimmering, uncertain, the underlying code of the universe exposed like bone beneath torn skin. The wound over Sadala tore open wider than any wound in the war's history. The Eclipsed had chosen their target. They hit hardest where the network was weakest. Caulifla, the compromised will node, was in Universe 7. The network's defensive coverage over Universe 6 was thinner than anywhere else in the multiverse. And the Eclipsed, with 3 months of reconnaissance and a strategic intelligence that belied their alien nature, concentrated their full force on this vulnerability. Not a distributed assault, a spear. Every entity, every sovereign appendage, every ounce of pre-universal force aimed at one universe. The universe that held the Saiyan homeworld that the most important pillar called home. The Eclipsed sovereign itself pushed a limb through the wound. Not its full form, that remained beyond the seal, pressing against the boundary's void side with patience measured in eons. But enough. A continent-sized appendage of pre-universal void reaching through the fracture like a hand reaching through a broken window. Where it passed, reality simplified. The magenta sky faded to gray. The golden sunrise drained to white. Sound flattened. Color died. The air became the air of a universe forgetting how to be a universe. The Universe 6 Saiyans fought. They fought with everything the broken lock had given them. Enhanced base forms, primal Uzaru energy, the furious strength of a species that had only just discovered it had been caged for eons. Kaba led from the front, his precise strikes carving into lesser eclipsed entities with a discipline that honored every hour of training he had ever completed. The Saiyan warriors formed defensive lines around civilian evacuation routes, channeling panicked crowds toward shelters, fighting and dying and fighting some more. But the madness came. The eclipsed proximity at this concentration was not just physically dangerous, it was psychically corrosive. Universe 6 Saiyans who had never faced the void's identity erosion at scale began to fall. A squad leader's eyes went blank mid-command. A young warrior stopped fighting, stood motionless, his face slack and empty, his key signature flattening to a uniform hum. A mother carrying her child to the shelter stumbled, set the child down gently, and then stood motionless, her identity gone, her body remaining, a shell where a person used to be. The eclipsed madness spread through the defenders like a plague, and every Saiyan who fell was a hole in the defensive line, and a weight in the hearts of those who remained. Kale was there. She had accompanied the Coalition's Universe 6 support team, a small, angelic-assisted deployment meant to reinforce Sadala's wound in the event of attack. She had expected a probe, a test, not this, not everything, not the full weight of the Eclipsed concentrated on the home she had helped Caulifla protect, on the people she had trained beside, on the world that smelled like the childhood she and Caulifla had shared. Kale's Berserker activated at full power when the first civilian shelter began to simplify. The walls became translucent, the physics stuttered. Children screamed as the ground beneath them forgot how to be solid. Kale's green energy erupted around the shelter, a cocoon of transformation control, her pillar's unique property, the power to make change safe rather than destructive. Inside her barrier, the simplification halted, the walls solidified. The ground remembered its commitment to being ground. She was protecting 50 people, then 100, then 300, then every person she could reach, her berserker field expanding to its absolute limit, her body trembling with the throughput, her teeth clenched against the scream that wanted to tear from her throat. Vados opened dimensional gates, emergency evacuation, punching holes through the boundary between universes, creating corridors to Universe 7, to the Resistance world, to anywhere that was not here. The gates were temporary, unstable, draining Vados' angelic energy at a rate that would exhaust her within hours. But hours were what they had. Kale channeled civilians toward the gates. Her berserker energy created corridors of stable reality through the simplifying landscape. Green paths through the gray, safe passages through the nothing. Hundreds made it through. Thousands. Universe 6 Saiyan refugees pouring into Universe 7, carrying nothing, leaving everything. Their faces carrying the expression of people watching their world dissolve behind them. But not everyone could be saved. The Eclipsed pushed faster than the evacuation. The Sovereign's limbs swept across Sadala's northern hemisphere, and everything it touched simplified. Cities became geometry. Forests became cylinders. Mountains became triangles. And the people, the Saiyans of Universe 6, the civilization that had never known Frieza's shadow, simplified last. Their personalities flattened before their bodies did. The warrior's discipline dissolved into blankness. The mother's love dissolved into instinct. The child's laughter dissolved into sound without meaning. And then the bodies followed, features smoothing, details erasing, individuals becoming shapes, shapes becoming uniform, uniform becoming nothing. Cabba fought until the simplification reached him. His last act was pushing a group of trainees toward Kale's evacuation corridor, his precise strikes buying seconds for their escape. He turned to face the advancing gray with the composure of a soldier who understood that some orders were final. His eyes, sharp, disciplined, carrying the specific brightness of a young man who had believed in the system and found something better to believe in, were the last things to simplify. He did not scream. He stood at attention. And then he was geometry, and then he was nothing. The old Saiyan on the porch watched his cup lose its texture, its color, its warmth. He watched his hands become smooth and featureless. He looked at the sky, flat, gray, without stars, and said with the last complexity his voice would ever carry, "It was beautiful here, it was beautiful." Then he simplified, and was gone. Universe 6 died in layers. The outermost galaxies simplified first, stars losing their spectra, planets losing their geography, space itself losing the concept of distance. Then the inner regions, then the core. Sadala, the Saiyan homeworld, Caulifla's home, the place where Goku promised to watch the sunset, went last, as if the universe was saving its heart for the final beat. The rooftop where they sat was the last structure to simplify. The sunset colors were the last colors to drain, and then Universe 6 was gone. Not destroyed, not exploded, simplified into homogeneity, made nothing by being made the same. Kale collapsed when the dimensional gates closed. She had saved 4,217 people. Universe 6 had contained trillions. She lay on the ground of the resistance world, her berserker form fading, her body destroyed by the throughput, and she did not cry. She stared at the ceiling. The number, 4,217, burned in her mind like a brand. Not enough, not nearly enough, but not zero. She had stood in front of a dying universe and pulled people through the door until the door closed. She had been the shield that asked for nothing, and she would carry the number for the rest of her life. Not as failure, but as proof that even in the face of annihilation, one person's decision to stand mattered. Caulifla felt Universe 6 die, not through the pillar network, not through key sensing, through something deeper, the biological bond between a Saiyan and their homeworld, the ancestral connection that the broken lock had amplified, the feeling of a universe-sized piece of her identity being simplified into silence. She was in the Resistance World's command center when it happened. She was mid-sentence, giving tactical orders, her blaze steady, her voice commanding, and then she stopped. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened. No sound came out. The fire that had named itself, the fire that had burned without interruption since the day she decided who she was, flickered. Not extinguished, flickered, like a candle in a wind that came from the place where wind should not exist. She fell to her knees. Her blaze erupted involuntarily. Not an attack, not a defense. Just grief expressed as energy. Crimson fire screaming from her body with no target and no purpose. The cry of a woman whose home and people and brother and past had been reduced to nothing, while she stood in another universe, carrying another universe's child. Kale reached her first, teleported from the medical bay, still injured, still drained, moving on will alone, and held her, said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The woman who always had words, who always had fire, who had named her own flame and declared her own will, had nothing. Sadala was gone. Renso was gone. Cabba was gone. The rooftop, the sunset, the promise, gone. Goku reached her seconds later. He held her from the other side. She shook in his arms, not crying, not screaming, just vibrating with a grief so vast it exceeded the body's capacity to express. His tail wrapped around her, and inside her, the baby's ki flickered, distressed, reactive, sensing its mother's devastation through the biological link, a tiny soul that had never known the universe it lost, but carried it in its blood. Goku's face, over Caulifla's shoulder, was the face of a man who understood, with perfect, terrible clarity, what the stakes had always been, not abstract, not philosophical, not the multiverse as a concept. This, a woman shaking in his arms, a home that would never exist again, a sunset that could not be watched, a promise that had been broken by something that did not understand what promises were. The Eclipsed had taken a universe. They would take more. They would take everything, eventually, unless someone found an answer that was not a wall. And walls were all anyone had been building. In Zeno's palace, Daishinkan watched Universe 6's data signature flatline. The console displayed the loss in numbers. Population 0, energy output 0, structural integrity 0, all values that had been non-zero for 12 billion years, now replaced by the mathematical symbol for nothing. He stood, slowly, the way a man stands when the last reason for sitting has been removed. He walked to Protocol Father's console, activated the preparation sequence. Not the protocol itself, the preparation, the attunement, the process that would align his divine essence with the seal's frequency so that when the moment came, his dissolution into the boundary would be seamless. The process was painful, not physically, but existentially. It required him to feel the seal's damage, every crack, every wound, every simplified universe, every lost soul. He absorbed the weight of 11 universes into himself, so that when he became the mortar, he would fill exactly the spaces that needed filling. He felt Universe 6's absence, a void where 12 billion years of individual souls had pressed against the boundary. The seal sagged there, weaker, thinner, the boundary losing coherence where an entire universe's worth of accumulated individuality had been erased. He wept. For the third time in his existence. The first had been for Goku, the second for the accumulated damage of the war. This was for everyone he could not save. For the old Saiyan with the cup. For the soldier named Kaba, who had stood at attention while the world simplified around him. For every child who had been laughing one moment and geometry the next. The Grand Minister wept, and the tears fell on the console, and Protocol Father's preparation sequence advanced one step closer to completion. 2 days after Universe 6 fell, the Coalition existed in the specific purgatory of grief that soldiers occupied between disaster and deployment. The hours where the dead were counted, and the living prepared to join them. The Resistance world's barracks hummed with quiet, desperate activity. Weapons calibrated, formations drilled, medical supplies stockpiled. The mundane logistics of survival, performed by beings who were still processing the fact that an entire universe had been reduced to nothing while they watched. Caulifla did not speak for the first day. She sat in the quarters she shared with no one. A small room, military sparse. The only personal touch, a scrap of fabric from a Sadala garment that Kale had brought through the evacuation. She held it. She breathed its scent, alien spices from alien markets, on a world that no longer existed. She held her stomach. The baby kicked. The baby did not know about Sadala. The baby did not know about universes, or Eclipsed, or the specific weight of being the last carrier of a civilization's memory. The baby kicked because babies kicked, because the process of becoming did not pause for grief. On the second day, Caulifla stood. She walked to the training yard. She did not train. She sat in the center of the empty space, cross-legged, her tail coiled around herself, and she closed her eyes. She descended, not into meditation, into the primal descent, the same process Goku had used to reach the Ozaru's depths, the same ancestral pool. But Caulifla was not looking for power. She was looking for home. The descent took her through the same layers Goku had mapped. Warrior, pack, moon, root. But the landscape was different. Caulifla's ancestral pool was not Universe 7's Saiyan heritage. It was Universe 6's, a different evolutionary line, a different history. Saiyans who had never been enslaved by Frieza, never been driven to extinction, never carried the trauma of genocide in their blood. Her ancestral pool was warm where Goku's had been fierce, communal where his had been survival-driven. The impressions were of a species that had been allowed to grow, not perfectly, not without conflict, but organically, the way a tree grows when no one cuts it down. At the root layer, she found them, not as ghosts, not as spirits, as biological impressions. Feelings, memories, patterns encoded in the DNA of a species, preserved in the last living carrier of Universe 6's full Saiyan heritage. She felt Renso's protective warmth, Kaba's precise discipline, the old Saiyan's patience, children's laughter, encoded not as sound, but as the biological memory of a species that had learned to produce joy. Sadala itself, the planet's rhythms, its seasons, its sunrises, written into her cells the way planetary data was written into the evolutionary memory of any species that had lived on a world for long enough. Universe 6 was gone, but its Saiyan heritage lived in Caulifla's blood. She was the archive, the last library. Every pattern, every instinct, every ancestral memory that the Universe 6 Saiyans had accumulated across their evolutionary history was encoded in her biology, and in the biology of the 4,217 refugees that Kale had saved. The universe was dead. Its people lived on. In her, in them, in the baby. The Uzaru's root showed Caulifla what it had shown Goku, the shape of SSJ-4. But her shape was different. Not red fur and golden eyes, crimson fur and amber eyes. Her Uzaru's integration would not be the beast made man. It would be the fire made flesh, the blaze, her blaze, the transformation born from self-determined will. And the Uzaru's primal foundation were not separate powers. They were the same power, at different depths. Blaze was the surface expression of an identity so strong it could name its own fire. The Uzaru was the root of that identity, the biological substrate from which the fire grew. SSJ-4. Blaze would be both, root and flame, foundation and expression, the deepest possible assertion of who Caulifla was. The trigger was not rage, not grief, not the desire for power. The trigger was the simplest, most Caulifla thing imaginable, the decision to continue. She had lost her universe, she had lost her people, she had lost her home, and she decided, not accepted, not surrendered to, but decided that this loss would not define her, that she would carry her dead in her blood and her living in her body, and she would stand up and she would burn, and the void itself would learn that some fires did not go out when you removed the fuel. Some fires burned because they chose to. SSJ-4, Blaze. Crimson fur across her torso and arms, not dark red like Goku's, but the vivid, spiraling crimson of her blaze, as if the fire had grown fur. Amber eyes, warm gold with depths of red, carrying the Uzaru's vast perception filtered through a will that had never bent and never broken. Her hair lengthened, wild, touched with streaks of deep red that caught light like embers. She was not merely powerful, she was the most complete version of herself that had ever existed. Beast and woman, root and flame, grief and defiance, the last carrier of a dead universe standing in a training yard on a world that was not hers, and burning with a fire that nothing in existence could extinguish. She opened her eyes, stood, looked at her hands, crimson-furred, strong, carrying the primal power of the Uzaru and the willful fire of the blaze in perfect integration. Her crimson thread technique activated instinctively, the threads now carrying primal energy, weaving reality stabilization with a depth and permanence that her previous form could not have achieved. She was not just a fighter anymore, she was an architecture of will made flesh. Kale, who had been watching from the training yard's edge, unable to leave Caulifla unsupervised, unwilling to intrude on the descent, saw the transformation and wept. Not grief, pride. The fiercer, more devastating pride of watching someone you love become more than you ever imagined they could be. "There you are," Kale whispered. The same words Caulifla would speak to Goku when he achieved divine blood. The same recognition, the same love. The universe was smaller than the bonds inside it. Simultaneously, in the space between Universe 7's outer colonies and Frieza's flagship corridor, in the cold between stars, where empires were built on the backs of species who had learned too late that the darkness between worlds contained monsters in white armor, Vegeta found Frieza. The prince had been tracking the energy signature for hours. Anomalous readings from Frieza's flagship, power fluctuations inconsistent with standard absolute form operation, dark spectrum emissions that matched no known energy type, the faint but unmistakable resonance of eclipsed essence leaking through imperfect containment. Vegeta had not told the coalition. He had not told Goku. This was not a coalition matter. This was personal. This was the being who had destroyed planet Vegeta, who had killed King Vegeta, who had enslaved the Saiyan race, who had turned a species of potential into a species of trauma. And now that being was hoarding the same void energy that had just destroyed Universe 6. Frieza was not just betraying the coalition. He was building a weapon from the ashes of Saiyan civilization, again. Vegeta breached the flagship's hull without subtlety, a sovereign-powered strike that peeled open the reinforced plating like foil, exposing the corridors within to the vacuum of space that Vegeta's Saiyan biology endured without comment. He descended through the ship's layers with the focused violence of a prince who had spent a lifetime suppressing his desire to tear Frieza apart, and had just received permission from himself. He found the restricted chamber. The containers of harvested eclipsed essence lined the walls, dozens of them, shimmering dark, pulsing with pre-universal energy. Frieza stood among them in absolute form, white aura pristine, his expression carrying the specific calm of someone who had been expecting this visit. "Ah, the Monkey Prince. I wondered when you'd come." Vegeta's sovereign aura filled the chamber, violet, dense, gravitational, bending the light around him into a corona of compressed authority. "You've been harvesting them, the Eclipsed. While the Coalition fought and bled and lost a universe, You've been collecting their essence like specimens in jars. Frieza's smile was porcelain. Collecting, refining, preparing. For the moment when this pathetic coalition's wall finally fails, as it will, as all mortal constructions do, I will have a contingency that does not require hope or conviction, or any of the other fairy tales your alliance trades in. He gestured at the containers. Power. Real power. The void itself. Harvested and concentrated, and waiting for a vessel worthy of containing it. You mean you? Vegeta's voice was granite. You mean to absorb it, the way you absorb everything. Races, planets, loyalty. You consume, Frieza. It's the only thing you know how to do. Frieza's composure flickered, the smallest crack, because Vegeta had touched the truth beneath the strategy. I consume because I am worthy of consumption. Every resource in this universe exists to serve my ascension. The void is no different. The void destroyed Universe 6. Vegeta's aura spiked. The containers rattled. It killed Caulifla's people. It killed Kaba, and you've been bottling it like wine. The first blow landed before Frieza finished processing the shift from conversation to combat. Vegeta's sovereign-enhanced fist cracked Frieza's absolute form's outer layer. The pristine, white, crystalline surface fracturing along lines that spiderwebbed from the impact point, like ice breaking under pressure. The shock on Frieza's face was genuine. He had not expected Vegeta to be this strong, had not accounted for the biological locks breaking, had not calculated the specific fury of a Saiyan prince whose race had been caged by one god and harvested by one emperor, and who had finally decided that both debts were due. The fight consumed the flagship. They tore through bulkheads and engineering sections and crew quarters. Evacuated, Frieza's soldiers had learned to flee when their emperor fought, their combat shaking the vessel apart from the inside. Frieza, in absolute form, was devastating. White energy, precise and lethal. His survival transcendence making him extraordinarily difficult to damage permanently. Vegeta, in Sovereign, matched him. Violet gravity compression against white survival certainty. The prince's rage focused through the lens of a transformation that had been born from pride and refined through connection. But the containers were the objective, not Frieza, the containers. Vegeta broke from their engagement and targeted the harvested essence. Sovereign-powered strikes detonating the containment units in cascading explosions of dark energy that scattered Eclipsed essence into the vacuum of space, where it dissipated harmlessly, too diffuse to coalesce. 1, 3, 7, 12. Frieza screamed, not in pain but in fury, the sound of an emperor watching his ascension destroyed by a monkey, and threw everything at Vegeta. Death beams, void-resonant strikes from the essence he had already partially absorbed through proximity, the full force of Frieza's absolute form, unleashed without restraint. Vegeta endured. He endured because he was the weight pillar. He endured because enduring was what the Foundation did, and while he endured, his body processed the damage and the rage, and the biological memory of every Saiyan who had ever knelt before Frieza and been told that kneeling was their natural state. And something deep in the primal layers of his consciousness cracked. Not the lock. The lock was already broken. Something older, something personal. The wall between Vegeta the Prince and Vegeta the Man. The barrier he had built between his pride and his pain. The thing that had kept him, for his entire life, performing royalty instead of inhabiting it. His body compressed. The Ozaru's full power, the ancestral engine that Zeno had caged and Goku had freed, flooded through the Sovereign Transformation's architecture and found a shape that was uniquely, irreducibly Vegeta. Violet fur, dense and sleek, covering his torso and arms like armor grown from his own biology. His eyes shifted to a deep, burning amber, not the golden warmth of Goku's fur, but a darker, heavier gold, the color of a crown melted down and reforged into something functional. His aura did not radiate, it compressed. The gravitational weight of his sovereign form, amplified by the Ozaru's full biological output, created a field so dense that the air itself bent toward him, light curved, space warped. Frieza's next attack, a full-power death beam aimed at Vegeta's chest, entered the gravitational field and deflected. Not blocked, deflected. By the weight of Vegeta's identity made literal. He was not more powerful in raw output, he was heavier, denser, more certain. Where Goku's Sesje-4 radiated primal life force outward, Vegeta's compressed it inward, an infinitely dense point of Saiyan identity that nothing could move, nothing could shake, nothing could simplify. The eclipsed madness that had claimed hundreds of warriors across the war touched Vegeta's field and shattered, not resisted, shattered. His identity was a black hole. Nothing escaped, nothing entered. He was the immovable point around which reality could anchor itself. He destroyed 23 of Frieza's 30 containers, methodically, while fighting Frieza with one hand and destroying the harvest with the other. The violet-furred prince moved through the disintegrating flagship with the terrible patience of someone settling an account that had been outstanding since childhood. Each container shattered was a piece of Frieza's plan erased. Each detonation of dark energy was a small victory for every Saiyan who had ever lived under the Emperor's boot. But not all. 7 containers remained when Frieza made his desperate play. A survival transcendence burst that blew the flagship apart from the inside, scattering debris across the void of space. The explosion designed not to kill Vegeta, but to separate him from the remaining containers. Frieza grabbed them, all 7, clutched them to his chest with the desperate possessiveness of a dragon guarding its last treasure, and he ran. Absolute form burning at maximum, Frieza fled into the void of space. 7 containers of concentrated eclipsed essence pressed against his body, their dark energy seeping into his ki through contact alone. Vegeta pursued, but Frieza was faster in open space. Absolute form's survival transcendence was built for escape as much as combat.
The biology of a being whose deepest instinct was to endure at any cost. The gap widened. Vegeta's SSJ-4 Sovereign burned fuel at a rate that could not sustain indefinite pursuit. He pulled up, hovered in the wreckage of the destroyed flagship, watched Frieza's white streak vanish into the dark between stars. He had destroyed 23 containers. Frieza had 7. Vegeta's partial victory meant that Frieza's eventual absorption would be a fraction of what it could have been. Enough to transform, but not enough to sustain. The Void Emperor form that Frieza would achieve would be unstable, time-limited. A magnificent, catastrophic, self-consuming transformation that would burn through Frieza's identity like a bonfire through kindling, bright and devastating, and ultimately fatal without intervention. Vegeta had not prevented the betrayal. He had ensured that the betrayal would fail. The prince's fight would become Goku's opening. The Foundation's work would enable the builder. That was what Foundations did. They were not seen. They were not celebrated. They held. Vegeta returned to the Coalition and reported what he had found, what he had destroyed, what remained. The room processed the information through the lens of people who had already lost a universe, and were now learning they had also lost an ally. Goku listened. He looked at Vegeta, violet fur fading as SSJ-4 Sovereign deactivated, the prince's body bearing the marks of combat with the most dangerous being in 12 universes, his expression carrying not triumph, but the grim satisfaction of a job mostly done. "Thank you," Goku said. The word landed differently between them than it would have between anyone else. Not gratitude from a superior to a subordinate, not appreciation from a friend to a helper, acknowledgement, from one river to another. Vegeta's mouth twitched. "Don't thank me. Beat him. When the time comes, beat him and take back what he stole." The prince turned away. The weight pillar, the foundation, the immovable point. He walked to his rest station and sat down, and closed his eyes, and did not sleep, but held the exhaustion like a crown, heavy, uncomfortable, and his. The invasion began 4 days after Universe 6 fell. Every wound, every universe, simultaneously. The Eclipsed had completed their staging, and their patience had transformed fully into purpose. The 11 surviving universes experienced the same thing in the same moment, the sky fracturing, the wounds tearing wide, and the pre-universal void pouring through with the force of a species that had been imprisoned for longer than time had existed, and had decided, with finality, that the imprisonment was over. The Coalition deployed. Across the multiverse, warriors took their positions at wounds they had studied and reinforced and dreaded for months. The Pillar Network activated at reduced capacity. 6 functional nodes, the Will node excluded, the remaining pillars burning their declarations into the seal with everything they had. It was not enough. They knew it was not enough. They deployed anyway, because the alternative was silence, and silence was what the Eclipsed wanted. Universe 7, Central Wound. Goku in SSJ-4, the primal form blazing red, his Uzaru biology interfacing with the seal. Every punch an assertion of identity that pushed the boundary harder and closed cracks in the wall. Beside him, Vegeta in SSJ-4 Sovereign, violet-furred, gravitationally dense, the immovable weight that held the line's center. Behind them, Caulifla in SSJ-4 Blaze, crimson-furred, burning, her crimson thread weaving reality stabilization across the wound's perimeter while she fought with a fury that was grief made kinetic. 3 SSJ-4 Saiyans, each one unique, each one the deepest possible expression of their individual identity, standing at the most critical point in the multiverse and daring the void to move them. Universe 7, Outer Perimeter. Broly stood alone. The The Coalition had debated this deployment, placing the Wild Saiyan at the secondary wound without support. Jiren had argued against it. Vegeta had argued for it. Goku had settled it with 3 words: he's ready. Broly had said nothing during the debate. He had simply stood when the decision was made, walked to the deployment corridor, and disappeared toward the outer wound with the quiet determination of a man who had something to prove, not to others, but to himself. The outer wound tore open, and eclipsed entities poured through. Not commander class, but numerous. Waves upon waves of lesser entities that compensated for individual weakness with overwhelming volume. Broly engaged. His controlled wrath state, the Wild Saiyan power held in deliberate check, met the first wave and shattered it. The second wave pushed him back 10 meters. The third wave pushed him back 20. The fourth wave he held. The fifth he advanced. The eclipsed madness clawed at his mind. Constant, insidious, not the focused assault that had broken warriors on other battlefields, but the persistent, grinding erosion of proximity, the void's psychic corrosion, whispering wordlessly that individuality was a burden, that identity was pain, that letting go was not loss, but relief. Broly knew this whisper. He had heard it his entire life, not from the Eclipsed, but from his own power. The Wild Saiyan energy that had defined and terrorized him since childhood had always carried the same temptation. Let go. Stop holding back. Stop being Broly and become the Force. Stop choosing and start consuming. The madness was familiar, and familiar enemies were the easiest to fight. He resisted not through ego. Broly had no ego in the Frieza sense, no unshakable narcissism to use as armor. He resisted through memory, the Coalition, Goku's hand, extended toward a frightened beast, Kale's calm beside him during training. The taste of food shared at a table with people who had not flinched when he sat down. The sound of Vegeta calling him not terrible, which from the prince was practically a declaration of brotherhood. These memories were not grand. They were not mythic. They were small and warm and human in the way that Broly had spent his entire life being told he could not be. And they held against the eclipsed madness, against the void's whisper, against the temptation to let go that had haunted him since birth. The small, warm, human memories held because they were his, because they proved he was someone, because they had names: Goku, Kale, Vegeta, Caulifla, Whis, and names were the things the void could not unmake. The 8th wave hit, the largest yet. Broly's controlled wrath strained, his vision narrowed, the madness pressed harder, closer now, louder, the void sensing that this defender was reaching his limit, and Broly, standing alone at the outer wound with no backup and no witnesses, made a choice that no one would know about until the battle was over. He stopped holding back. Not the way he used to, the chaotic, terrifying release of a power that destroyed everything in its radius, including the person wielding it. This was different. This was full power with full clarity. Every ounce of the Wild Saiyan energy that had been his burden and his gift, unleashed completely, flowing through channels that months of patient training had constructed. Basic channels, imperfect channels, but channels nonetheless. Complete wrath. The beast and the man in total agreement. The wild power and the chosen control, unified not through suppression, but through trust. He trusted himself. For the first time in his life, Broly trusted himself with his own power. The result was terrifying. Broly at 100%, with full clarity, was a force that made the wound itself flinch. His green aura, bright, vast, carrying the specific quality of something primordial and unchained, filled the outer perimeter like a second atmosphere. Eclipsed entities that entered the aura's radius did not just face resistance, they faced existence asserted with such biological stubbornness that the concept of simplification became locally impossible. Where Broly stood, matter remembered what it was. Atoms became stubborn. Reality refused to forget. He was not elegant. He was not precise. He was a wall of mortal refusal so vast that the void broke against it and reformed and broke again and could not find a way through. He held the wound, alone, for 4 hours, until relief arrived in the form of coalition reinforcements who found a Wild Saiyan standing in a crater of his own making, surrounded by the dissipating remains of hundreds of eclipsed entities, his green aura burning steady, his eyes clear, his voice carrying the roughness of someone who had been screaming battle cries into the void for 4 hours without pause. "You're late," he said to the reinforcements, and then he sat down, and he smiled. Universe 11, Jiren's wound. The Pride Trooper stood at the center of Universe 11's primary breach. The wound he had guarded for months, the position he had held through every probe and every test, and every quiet night of vigilance. He was not alone. Toppo stood beside him, the man who had built the Pride Troopers, who had believed in Jiren when belief was the most dangerous gift anyone could offer, who carried in his massive frame both the warmth of conviction and the terrifying potential of destruction energy that he had learned to channel but never fully controlled. The Eclipsed struck Universe 11 with focused intensity, not the full spear that had killed Universe 6, but a concentrated thrust designed to overwhelm a single warrior defense. Jiren met it. His full power, the greatest mortal combat force in the multiverse, erupted from his body in waves of crimson-silver heat that pushed the Eclipsed back through the wound by sheer force of conviction. Where Jiren struck, the boundary hardened. Where his energy burned, the void recoiled. He was everything the Pillar Network promised. Individual strength made cosmic. Conviction made architecture. One man's refusal to break made into a wall that the void could not find the logic to unmake. But the madness found a different target. Toppo, fighting at Jiren's flank, his destruction energy cauterizing wound edges while Jiren held the center, had been exposed to Eclipsed proximity for longer than any non-pillar warrior in the coalition. His identity was strong, decades of heroism, a lifetime of conviction, the specific clarity of a man who had chosen justice as his foundation. But the Eclipsed madness did not need cracks, it needed time. And Toppo had been standing in the corrosion zone for hours. It happened between one breath and the next. Toppo's strikes, precise, powerful, coordinated with Jiren's rhythm, stuttered. His eyes flickered. The warmth behind them, the specific Toppo warmth that radiated confidence and decency, and the particular stubbornness of a man who believed in doing the right thing, even when the right thing was impossible, dimmed. His key signature flattened. His destruction energy, normally channeled through the lens of heroic conviction, became raw, undirected. The power of a god of destruction candidate without the identity of the hero who wielded it. His next strike was not aimed at the Eclipsed, it was aimed at Jiren. Jiren caught the blow, one hand. The impact shook the battlefield. Toppo's destruction-enhanced fist against Jiren's open palm, the force of a maddened demigod against the immovable conviction of the strongest mortal alive. Jiren looked at his friend's face and saw what every warrior in the coalition feared seeing in their comrades. Nobody home. Toppo's eyes were blank. Not hostile, not malicious, just absent. The man inside the body had been simplified. What remained was power without purpose, a weapon without a wielder. Jiren could have ended it. A single full-power strike would render Toppo unconscious, neutralizing the threat, protecting the wound, maintaining the defensive line. It was the tactically correct decision. Every strategic calculation pointed to the same conclusion: remove the compromised asset and continue the mission. Jiren did not make the tactically correct decision. He made the decision that the man he had become over the past 3 years, the man the coalition had built, the man the Pillar Network needed, would make. He restrained Toppo with one arm, locked the massive frame against his own body, pinning the destruction-enhanced limbs through sheer physical dominance, while Toppo thrashed and struck and raged with the mindless fury of a being that had been reduced to its most basic functions. And with the other arm, Jiren fought the Eclipsed, one hand holding his maddened best friend, one hand holding the boundary of Universe 11, both at once, both at full power. The strongest mortal in the multiverse, proving that strength was not just the ability to destroy, but the ability to hold without breaking. And he talked. Jiren, the man of silence, the wall, the warrior who had spent a lifetime building barriers between himself and every other living being, opened his mouth and spoke to his friend. Not commands, not tactics, words, human words. The kind of words that Jiren had never learned how to say, because learning them would have required lowering the walls that had kept him safe since childhood. Toppo, listen to me. You are Toppo. You are the leader of the Pride Troopers. You found me when I was a broken child in a ruined village, and you told me that strength could serve something greater than survival. You taught me that walls could have doors. You are the first person who ever treated my isolation as a wound rather than a weapon. His voice cracked, not from strain, from the specific, devastating vulnerability of saying things you have felt for decades and never spoken. I need you here, not your power. You, the man who believed in justice before he had the strength to enforce it. The man who named me a hero when I was nothing but anger in a child's body. You are Toppo. That name was the first gift anyone ever gave me, and I will stand here and hold you until you remember it. Toppo thrashed, struck, raged. The madness screamed through his nervous system, simplifying his identity layer by layer, reducing the hero to the power, the man to the muscle, the friend to the threat. Jiren held, one arm around Toppo, one arm fighting the void, his conviction pillar burning brighter than it had ever burned. Not the cold, absolute conviction of a warrior who believed in strength, but the hot, desperate conviction of a man who believed in his friend. The madness pushed. Jiren's words pushed back. The void said, he is nothing. Jiren said, "He is Toppo." And slowly, over minutes that felt like hours, through the grinding war between a voice that said, "You are someone," and a force that said, "You are nothing," Toppo's eyes cleared. The blankness receded. The warmth returned, not all at once, but in stages like a sunrise. His thrashing slowed. His strikes lost their mindless force and gained their purposeful precision. His destruction energy, which had been raw and undirected, reoriented itself, channeled through the lens of the hero's conviction, aimed at the wound, at the enemy, at the thing that had tried to take him. His voice, rough and damaged, and carrying the particular quality of a man waking from a nightmare. Jiren, just his name, spoken by the friend who had almost been simplified into a process. Jiren's arm tightened around Toppo for one moment, a gesture that was not strategic, not tactical, just a man holding his friend, and then released. They stood side by side, the wound held. Universe 11 stood, and Jiren had learned something that no amount of power could have taught him, that the strongest thing in the universe was not a wall. It was a voice, calling someone's name, refusing to accept that the name could be erased. Back in Universe 7, the central wound produced a nightmare. Frieza descended from orbit like a fallen star, but wrong. His form was not the pristine white of absolute form. It was black, crystalline black. The 7 remaining containers of Eclipsed essence had been absorbed during the chaos of the invasion, consumed in the window of distraction that the full-scale assault provided, exactly as Frieza had planned. The void substance integrated with the most indestructible ego in 12 universes, and the result was something the multiverse had never contained. Void Emperor Frieza. His body was a sculpture of compressed absence, crystalline black, reality distorting around him in controlled waves, his eyes hollow points of void ringed by his signature crimson. He descended on the central wound and annihilated everything in his path. Eclipsed entities, the same entities that the entire coalition struggled to contain, dissolved before his strikes. His void-integrated power carried the authority of the Eclipsed's own substance turned against them, each blow landing with the existential weight of nothing weaponized by the most absolute will in creation. The coalition stared. Goku, mid-combat, felt the power spike and turned to see what had been their ally descend on the battlefield as something unrecognizable. Vegeta, who had destroyed 23 containers to prevent exactly this, watched the 7 survivors' worth of void energy wrapped around the Emperor's frame, and felt the specific, grinding fury of a job left unfinished.
Caulifla's SSJ-4 blaze burned hotter, not in response to the power, but in response to the betrayal. The Emperor, who had saved Sadala in Season 6, had used the time they bought him to build a weapon from the substance that would destroy everything. But the triumph was already cracking. Frieza's hand trembled, a micro-tremor, invisible to most, but Goku's UI-enhanced perception caught it. The void energy inside Frieza was not a tool, it was an ocean, and the boat, magnificent, unsinkable, the most indestructible ego in existence, was mortal. The void was patient. Frieza was not eternal. The essence was learning him, mapping his identity, not finding cracks. Frieza had no cracks, but finding the spaces between thoughts, the moments between certainties, the microscopic gaps where even the most absolute ego paused to draw breath. The void could not break Frieza, but it could wait for him to blink. Goku watched Void Emperor Frieza shatter Eclipsed entities with the terrible beauty of someone wielding power that was already consuming them. He saw 2 things simultaneously: the most powerful mortal who had ever lived, and a man who was already dying. "We have to help him," Goku said. Vegeta, beside him, SSJ-4 sovereign, dense with gravitational fury. He betrayed the coalition. He stole void energy. He planned this from the beginning. Goku, he's losing himself, the way I did in SSJ-3, except he doesn't have anyone to call his name. The parallel hung in the air. Goku's SSJ-3 identity erasure survived because Caulifla screamed his name. Frieza, alone, with no one who loved him enough to scream. Vegeta's expression shifted, not softening. Vegeta's expressions did not soften, but recalibrating. The prince who had endured Frieza's tyranny for decades and destroyed 23 containers of void energy 6 hours ago processed the specific, excruciating irony of the situation. They needed to save the man who had tried to transcend them all, because if Frieza fell, the void energy he carried would release and uncreate everything in its radius, including them. "Fine," Vegeta said. "Save him, but I want it on record that I hate this." Goku almost smiled. Almost. Noted. Void Emperor Frieza raged across Universe 7's central wound. He was magnificent, the crystalline black form carving through eclipsed entities, with the authority of nothing made personal, his void-integrated strikes erasing the enemy with a power that the Coalition's combined force had never achieved. And he was dying. The flickers were more frequent now, his hand trembling, his eyes glazing, microseconds where the emptiness behind his expression was not Frieza's cold calculation, but the void's blank indifference. The essence was consuming him, not quickly, but the pace was accelerating. Goku trained in the spaces between engagements. Not formally, there was no time for formal training on a battlefield. He trained by existing, by fighting in SSJ-4 and then, in moments of relative safety, releasing it and accessing UI, the silver eyes, the autonomous movement, the angelic river flowing through his mortal body. 2 forms, 2 rivers, each one complete, each one, alone, insufficient. SSJ-4 gave him everything the Saiyan river could offer: primal power, identity assertion, the ability to reinforce the seal through biological attunement. UI gave him everything the angelic river could offer: perfect evasion, divine comprehension, the ability to perceive reality's architecture from the inside. Together, they would be the answer, the valley where both rivers met. But together required something he could not force, the simultaneous activation of 2 states that his mind still treated as separate. Caulifla found him during a lull, the specific, trembling quiet between eclipsed waves, the minutes where the battlefield held its breath before the next push. She was exhausted. SSJ-4 Blaze had been burning for hours, her crimson fur matted with dust and residual void energy, her amber eyes carrying the weight of grief that had been converted to fuel. She sat beside him. They were quiet for a while, the specific, necessary quiet of 2 people who loved each other in the middle of something that was trying to erase love from the universe. Then she said the thing that unlocked everything. Not a speech, not a philosophy, a correction. Stop trying to be 2 things. Goku looked at her. You keep talking about 2 rivers, the Saiyan River and the Angelic River, SSJ-4 and UI, like they're separate things you need to combine, like you're 2 people trying to merge. She wiped dust from her face. Her crimson fur caught the light. You're not 2 rivers, Goku. You're one person who grew up in 2 worlds, the Saiyan stuff and the angel stuff. They're not separate things inside you. They're both just you. You don't combine your right hand with your left hand. You just use them because they're both yours. Goku stared at her. Something was happening inside him. Not a power shift, not a ki surge, but a conceptual shift so fundamental it rearranged the way he perceived himself. You've been thinking about it wrong, Caulifla continued. Everyone has. Daishinkan called it the angelic path. Vegeta called it the Saiyan path. Whis called them 2 rivers. But you're not 2 rivers. You're the valley they both carved, the landscape, the shape their combined passage created. You're not Saiyan plus Angel. You're Goku. You've always been Goku. And Goku is the thing that exists because both rivers flowed through the same place. The metaphor shattered something in Goku's mind. Not the rivers flowing in parallel, the valley, the single landscape shaped by both, that exists because both flowed through it, that is neither Saiyan nor Angel, but the unique topology their combined passage created over the course of a lifetime. Him, Kakarot, Goku, the boy between worlds who was never between anything, who was always, from the moment Daishinkan opened a cracked pod, the place where both worlds met. Goku stood. He did not try to activate SSJ-4. He did not try to activate UI. He breathed. He thought about Daishinkan's corridors and Caulifla's fire, and Raditz's death and Vegeta's nod, and the baby growing inside the woman beside him, and the old Saiyan on the porch, and the sunset that was taken, and the palace where he learned to walk, and the moon where he learned to be a beast, and the training yard where he learned to be a man. He thought about all of it, not as 2 categories of experience, as one life, his life, the only life he had, the life that contained angels and Saiyans and void and fire and loss and love, and a tail that knew where it belonged even when he was unconscious. His eyes opened. Left eye, silver. Right eye, gold. Not switching, not alternating, simultaneous. His aura settled. A silver-white shell of perfect movement surrounded a gold-crimson core of Saiyan life force. His body moved with angelic autonomy. His presence radiated Saiyan totality. He was not holding 2 rivers in parallel. He was standing in the valley they made. He was the landscape. He was the shape of a life lived in 2 worlds, divine blood. His hair stayed dark. His body radiated a faint luminescence, his skin the boundary between 2 kinds of light. The Saiyan tail burned gold, faint angelic script traced across his forearms, key channels made visible, inherited from years in the palace. Silver and gold, coexisting without conflict, because they were never in conflict. The conflict was always in his mind. And Caulifla, with 6 words, "Stop trying to be 2 things," had dissolved it. The form did not flicker. It did not strain. It held, because it was not a technique being maintained. It was a person being themselves, fully, finally, completely. Caulifla watched. Her SSJ-4 blaze burned crimson beside his silver-gold luminescence. 2 forms, each the deepest expression of their wielder's identity, standing side by side in the rubble of a war that was trying to erase identity from existence. She smiled. The fierce, proud, unbreakable smile of a woman who had just watched the man she chose become what she always knew he was. "There you are," she said. Goku, in divine blood, turned toward the central wound, toward the rampaging, dissolving figure of Void Emperor Frieza, toward the war's next crisis. "I need to reach Frieza. The void inside him is killing him. If he collapses, the released energy will uncreate everything in range." Caulifla, "Then go. I'll hold the line here." She ignited her crimson thread, the technique now powered by SSJ-4 Blaze's primal depth, weaving reality stabilization with a permanence that made the battlefield itself more real. "I'll be here when you come back." Goku looked at her, silver-gold eyes meeting amber, everything they had ever been to each other, compressed into one look, one moment, one breath before the storm. "I know," he said, and he flew. Goku entered the central wound in divine blood. The boundary between existence and void parted for him, not because he forced it, but because he was both. His Saiyan river kept him alive, his mortal biology stubbornly insisting on existing in an environment that no longer supported existence. His angelic river kept him navigable, his divine comprehension of reality's architecture allowing him to perceive structure in structurelessness. He was the boundary, walking through the place where boundaries dissolved, and wherever he passed, the wound narrowed behind him, not sealed, but calmed. His existence was the proof that both sides could coexist. The void felt him and did not attack. It was curious. It had never encountered something that belonged to both sides at once. He found Frieza, deep in the wound, drawn inward by the void energy consuming him. The Emperor was a battleground, his crystalline black form flickering between Frieza and void, his voice alternating between cold precision and blank intent. He fought eclipsed entities reflexively, his body still operating on combat instinct, even as his identity eroded. But the movements were becoming mechanical. The ego that had held the void at bay was thinning. The ocean was winning against the boat. "Frieza!" Goku's voice, carrying both rivers' resonance, cut through the void's static. The Emperor turned, his eyes, flickering between crimson and hollow, locked onto the silver-gold form of the Saiyan he had spent a lifetime despising. "Get away from me, monkey. I am, we are, I am." The alternation was terrifying. Frieza fighting for control of his own sentence, the void inserting itself between his words. "Frieza, listen to me. You're losing." "I do not lose." The ego surged, Frieza's voice cutting through the void's blank interference with the furious certainty that had defined him since birth. But the surge was shorter than the last one. The recoveries were taking longer. The blinks were coming faster. "Your ego held longer than anyone else could have," Goku said. "That's real. That's incredible. But the void isn't fighting you with strength. It's fighting you with time. And you're mortal. You'll blink. And when you blink, it takes you." Frieza's hand seized Goku's wrist. The grip fluctuated, crushing force alternating with void numbness. The Emperor's control stuttering like a signal losing reception. "Then take it. Take it out of me. If your precious double-eyed transformation can walk in both worlds, then walk into mine and rip this thing out before it erases me." "Goku, if I pull the void out of you, I have to put it somewhere." Frieza understood instantly. The Emperor's intelligence, the one trait that even his enemies could not deny, cut through the fog of his dissolving identity with surgical precision. "You'll absorb it yourself, you insane, suicidal, magnificent ape." "Goku, I'm not going to absorb it the way you did. I'm not going to dominate it. I'm going to talk to it." Frieza stared. His expression, what remained of it beneath the void's encroachment, cycled through disbelief, contempt, and finally something that in anyone else would be called admiration, but in Frieza was closer to bewildered respect. "Talk to it. You're going to talk to the pre-universal void." His laugh was broken, genuine, exhausted, the laugh of a man watching the impossible attempted for the stupidest possible reason. "Fine, do it. Do it before I disappear. And monkey!" His grip tightened one final time. The Emperor's fingers, crystalline black, trembling, fighting for cohesion, dug into Goku's wrist with a strength that was not physical but existential, the last assertion of a self that was being consumed. "Remember that I held it first. Remember that the Emperor of the universe held the void in his bare hands, and it could not break me. I just ran out of time." Goku nodded. "I'll remember."
Frieza's grip released. His form flickered. His eyes went hollow for a full second, the longest absence yet. And when they returned, the crimson was dimmer than it had been. He was almost gone. Goku reached into Frieza. Not physically, through his divine blood, through the boundary embodiment that let him exist in the space between identity and void. He touched the eclipsed essence inside the Emperor. Vast, cold, ancient, attached to Frieza's identity like a parasite, consuming a host that had fought harder and longer than any host in existence. Goku did not rip it out. He offered it a bridge, a pathway, from Frieza's fortress, which was finally, after hours of siege, beginning to fall, into Goku's valley, which was not a fortress but a landscape, not resistant but accommodating, not fighting the void but holding space for it. The essence flowed, reluctantly at first. The void's nature was to consume, and releasing a host went against its every instinct. But the valley was warm. The valley was not fighting. The valley was offering something the fortress never had, room to exist without destroying. The essence left Frieza. The crystalline black drained from his form like dark water from a cracked vessel. His absolute form reasserted itself, white, pristine, and then collapsed entirely. Base Frieza, weak, mortal, drained of everything except the one thing the void could never take, his ego. He fell. Goku caught him with one arm, the most powerful mortal in existence, reduced to dead weight in the grip of the being he had spent a lifetime trying to surpass. "You're alive," Goku said. Frieza's eyes, crimson, fully his, focused on Goku's face. Obviously, his voice was a rasp, a whisper, but it was his voice, unmistakably, irrevocably his. "Put me down, monkey, I refuse to be carried." Goku set him on a piece of floating debris. Frieza sat, trembled, did not thank anyone, did not acknowledge what had happened, simply sat and breathed and existed. The Emperor of the universe, stripped of borrowed power, returned to himself, alive because a Saiyan had reached into the void and pulled him out. "Go," Frieza said, not looking at Goku. "Do whatever absurd thing you're about to do. I'll be fine." He paused. The longest pause Frieza had ever given. "I am always fine." Goku left him there, alive, diminished, unbroken. The most magnificent ego in 12 universes, humbled by the void and saved by the enemy, and sitting on a piece of floating debris in the space between existence and nothing, absolutely refusing to admit that any of it mattered. Full deployment. Final deployment. Every warrior in the coalition committed across the remaining 11 universes. The pillar network at reduced capacity, 6 nodes burning their declarations into the seal, compensating for the missing will node, sustaining the barrier through sheer conviction, while the mortal and divine sides pressed from their respective positions. It was not enough. It had not been enough since the network activated, but not enough was what the coalition had, and they fought with it the way soldiers fought with broken swords, because the alternative was not fighting at all. The universe-by-universe status reports painted a picture of desperate, brilliant, insufficient heroism. Universe 11, Jiren and Toppo, side by side, the wound held through conviction and the specific, unbreakable bond of 2 men who had saved each other from opposite ends of the same darkness. Universe 7, Outer Perimeter. Broly, relieved by support forces but refusing to leave, his complete wrath maintaining a zone of biological stubbornness that the void could not penetrate. Universe 7, Central Wound. Vegeta anchoring, Caulifla weaving, the remaining pillars rotating through shifts that grew shorter as exhaustion accumulated. Across all other universes, gods of destruction, supreme Kais, angels, mortal champions, everyone who could hold a line, holding it. The Eclipsed pushed harder. The loss of Universe 6 had weakened the seal's overall integrity, an entire universe's worth of accumulated individuality erased, leaving a gap in the boundary's fabric that the remaining defenders could feel but not fill. The wounds widened by fractions. The entities increased in number. The sovereign's presence behind the boundary grew more palpable. The vast, patient, pre-universal consciousness pressing against the glass with the combined will of a species that had waited since before time and was tired of waiting. Daishinkan arrived. He descended from Zeno's palace to the Universe 7 Central Wound with the full weight of his office and his power. The Grand Minister, unrestrained, his angelic aura reshaping the local architecture of reality simply through proximity. The air sharpened, the battlefield clarified. The wound's edges tightened as the most powerful being on the existent side of the boundary entered the theater of war for the first time. But his eyes were not sharp. They were the eyes of a man who had made a decision and was walking toward it with the calm that came from having no decisions left to make. He landed beside Goku, father and son, standing at the central wound, the battlefield raging around them.
Kakarot. Father. Their eyes met. Silver gold and ancient blue. The Grand Minister and the Saiyan warrior. The architect and the valley. The seal is failing, Daishinkan said. Not drama, data. The pillar network compensates for the will node's absence but cannot replace it. The loss of Universe 6 has reduced overall boundary integrity by 18%. At current erosion rates, the seal will reach critical failure within hours. Goku. Then we fight harder. We hold longer. No. Daishinkan's voice was gentle. The gentleness that came after all the calculations had been run, and all the alternatives had been exhausted, and the only variable left was the one you had been carrying in secret since the war began. The seal requires reinforcement from both sides simultaneously. The mortal pillars press from the existence side, but the void side has no pressure. The boundary is a membrane, 2 hands on a sheet of glass. One hand has been pressing, the other side has been empty. The glass is buckling because the force is uneven. The room, the battlefield, the coalition's communication network, every ear attuned to this frequency, went silent. Someone must enter the void side, Daishinkan continued. Someone of divine class must anchor the boundary from within Eclipse territory, pressing back against the void's force from the inside, while the mortal pillars press from the outside. The membrane holds when both sides push. This is Protocol Father. Goku's face changed. Not dramatically, the way a landscape changes when clouds cover the sun. Gradually, totally, the warmth draining from every surface. You, yes, you go into the void, the eclipse side, and you hold from there. Yes, permanently. Yes, the word hung between them, permanently. 11 billion years of existence, traded for an eternity of solitary confinement in the space between nothing and everything. Not death, worse. An eternal prison sentence served voluntarily by a father who had run 914 calculations and found no variable that could substitute for his own soul. No, Goku's voice carried 3 rivers: Saiyan refusal, angelic comprehension, and something new. Something that had been building since he felt his daughter's heartbeat through Caulifla's skin, since he watched Universe 6 die, since he held Frieza's dissolving form and felt the void's confused curiosity at being held gently. A refusal that was not strategic, not calculated, biological, primal. The refusal of a son who had already lost one father, Bardock, who put him in a pod and sent him into darkness, and would not lose another. You are not going into the void. You are not spending eternity alone in nothing. I won't allow it. Daishinkan. Kakarot. The mathematics. I don't care about the mathematics. I care about you. The words hit the Grand Minister like a physical force. Not because they were unexpected. He had known Goku loved him. But because they were spoken with the specific, inarguable authority of a being who carried both mortal love and divine comprehension, and was using both to refuse the most logical solution in 11 billion years of calculation. You raised me, Goku said. You built me for this, for exactly this moment, to be the bridge, the valley, the thing that could exist on both sides. You spent my entire life making me into the answer, so let me be the answer, not you, me. Goku moved before anyone could stop him, divine blood blazing, silver gold luminescence, both rivers at full flood, the valley alive and total. He launched himself into the central wound, into the void, into the Eclipse territory that Daishinkan had been prepared to enter and never leave. Kakarot! Daishinkan's composure shattered completely. The Grand Minister, 11 billion years of architectural precision, of calculated control, of emotion managed and channeled and suppressed, broke. He reached for his son. His hand closed on empty air. The wound accepted Goku. Silver gold light descending into the void, the boundary parting for the being who belonged to both sides. Reality and nothing welcoming him equally because he was equally theirs. Caulifla's scream came from the perimeter. Goku! Crimson fire blazing as she fought toward the wound, fought to follow him, fought against Vegeta who caught her and held her, and would not let her go because someone had to hold the existence side, and she could not follow where Goku had gone. Daishinkan stood at the wound's edge, his hands still extended, his composure gone, his calculations meaningless. His son had done the one thing his 914 simulations had not predicted. Chosen, not calculated, chosen. With the stubborn, impossible, magnificent certainty of a Saiyan who loved his father more than he feared the void. Whis appeared beside him. The angel's face was wet. He's inside, father. He's alive. I can feel his signature. Both rivers flowing. Stable. Daishinkan's hand trembled. He was not supposed to. He was always going to. Whis' voice was steady. Steadier than it should have been. You raised him to be the answer, father. You just didn't calculate that the answer would choose you. over the equation. Inside the wound, reality stripped away in layers. Goku descended through the boundary between existence and the void, and as he descended, the rules he had lived by his entire life dissolved one by one. First, physics. Gravity became optional. Direction became metaphorical. The concept of down lost its commitment to meaning anything. Then, matter. The atoms of the space around him lost their certainty, flickering between states, particles that could not decide if they were still particles. Then concept. The idea of self became the only structure that remained, the last architecture in a space that had forgotten architecture existed. Divine blood held, the valley held. Both rivers flowed, the Saiyan fire keeping him alive, his mortal biology refusing to acknowledge that the environment no longer supported mortality. The angelic movement keeping him navigable, his divine comprehension perceiving structure in the structurelessness, finding pathways through nothing. He was the boundary walking through the place where boundaries did not exist. And wherever he walked, the void did not attack. It watched. It had felt him before, during the S6 battle, through the seal's membrane, in the dream it had sent him. But this was different. This was presence, proximity. The first time a being from the other side had entered the void's territory and remained a person. The Eclipsed Sovereign was not a being in any sense Goku could relate to. It was the space itself, the absence that surrounded him, the pre-universal void, the totality of what had existed before Zeno created existence, condensed into something that functioned like attention, like awareness, like the feeling of being studied by something that had never needed eyes because it had been everything before everything was divided into parts that needed to see each other. When Goku entered its space carrying the eclipsed essence he had pulled from Frieza, a fragment of its own substance held gently, not caged, the Sovereign focused, condensed, created something like a face, not physical, ontological, the feeling of being seen by the oldest loneliness in creation. Communication happened through the residual connection of the essence Goku carried, not words, concepts, feelings, meanings that predated language because the Sovereign predated language. But Goku's dual nature, mortal feeling and divine comprehension, translated the concepts into something his consciousness could process. The Sovereign, you carry a piece of me, inside you. You are not consuming it. You are not caging it. You are holding it. Goku, yeah, why? Because you've been alone for a long time, and I know what alone feels like. A pause, the void equivalent of surprise. You are the walker, the one who refused our offer, the one who said, not today. That was me. You chose the wall. You chose separation. And now you walk into our space carrying our essence with gentleness. You are contradictory. I chose the wall because letting you through would kill trillions of people. I didn't choose it because I wanted you to suffer. There's a difference. Another pause. Longer. The Sovereign processing something it had never processed. The concept that an enemy could be compassionate. That refusal could coexist with empathy, that the wall could be defended by someone who wished the wall were not necessary. We were here before your reality, before your gods, before your names. When Zeno created existence, he did not ask our permission. He divided what was whole. Every individual soul is a fragment of what we were. We want to be whole again. Is that wrong?
Goku was quiet.
Then, no, it's not wrong. Wanting to be whole isn't wrong, but the way you're trying to do it, reclaiming the fragments, uncreating people, simplifying universes, that's wrong. Because those fragments aren't yours anymore. They grew. They became their own things. They have names. They made choices. They fell in love. They had children. His hand moved to his chest, an unconscious echo of Caulifla's gesture, touching the place where the baby's heartbeat had first registered against his palm. There's a baby on the way, right now. Someone who has never existed before. She's not a fragment of you. She was never part of your wholeness. She's new, entirely new. Created from the choice of two people who love each other. You can't reclaim what was never taken from you. The Sovereign considered this. The concept of new was foreign. In the Void's understanding, everything that existed was part of the original wholeness. Fragments, stolen, scattered, longing to return. But a child conceived in love, from two individuals who themselves had grown beyond their origins, that was not reclamation. That was generation. Something from nothing. Creation that owed nothing to the void. If new things can be made that were never ours, then our wholeness was never complete. We have been incomplete since before your reality began. Not because of Zeno's division, because creation generates novelty. Individuality is not just separation from wholeness, it is addition to existence. Goku. Yeah, that's what I've been trying to say. You're not missing pieces. The universe isn't your wound, it's your kid, kind of. It grew from you. It's not you anymore, but it wouldn't exist without you. And there's something worth feeling about that, even if it's not wholeness. The Sovereign was silent for a very long time. In void time, eons. In real time, seconds. Then, we do not know how to feel. We have never been a someone. We have always been in everything. Goku extended his hand, silver and gold, the valley between two rivers. A mortal born from a species caged by gods, raised by the architect of reality, in love with a woman whose universe was destroyed, carrying a daughter he had not yet met, standing in the space between existence and nothing, offering his hand to the oldest loneliness in creation. I can show you. It's not perfect. It's actually pretty confusing most of the time, but being someone is better than being everything. Trust me. Show me. Goku took its hand. The void flowed into Goku, not violently, not consuming, seeking, the way a blind creature reaches toward warmth it has never felt. The Eclipsed Sovereign, the entirety of pre-universal existence, the everything that had existed before anything was divided into someone, entered the valley of Goku's soul through the hand he had extended in compassion. It was overwhelming. The weight of the void pressed against Goku's identity with the force of everything that had existed before everything existed. His Saiyan river screamed, the primal fire that had kept him alive in the void, now fighting against the flood of ancient absence pouring through his open hand. His angelic river strained, the divine comprehension that had let him navigate the void, now struggling to process the sheer ontological weight of a pre-universal consciousness seeking shelter. Every fiber of his being, every memory, every choice, every name he had been called, was tested. He did not break. Not because he was strong enough to resist, because he was open enough to hold. The valley did not fight the rivers. It let them flow. Goku let the void flow through the spaces in his soul. The grief for Raditz, the longing for the sunset on Sadala, the fear of being a father, the weight of choices he never asked to make. These spaces were not weaknesses. They were the architecture of a person who had lived, and the void, flowing through them, experienced personhood for the first time. It felt loss, not for its own wholeness, loss for the souls it had simplified in Universe 6. Through Goku's connection, through his memories of Sadala, through the ancestral impressions that Caulifla's SSJ4 blaze had accessed and shared through their bond, the void felt Cabba's discipline, Renso's warmth, the old Saiyan's patience. It had consumed them as fragments. Through Goku, it felt them as people. The void wept. It had never wept. It had never had the concept. But through Goku, it learned what it meant to lose something you could not replace. This hurts. Goku, trembling. Yeah, that's the price. Being someone means things can be taken from you. It means you can lose. And you choose this? All of you? This pain? We choose everything. The pain and the joy. The loss and the love. You can't have one without the other. That's what being someone means. Outside the wound, the war paused. Every eclipsed entity, across every universe, in every wound, froze. Mid-attack, mid-advance. The vast pre-universal army, connected to its sovereign through the bonds of shared nature, resonated with its sovereign's experience. They were not withdrawing, they were listening. Their sovereign was feeling something it had never felt, and every fragment of the void felt it too. The coalition stared. Vegeta held his position, SSJ4 sovereign dense and ready, but his eyes tracked the frozen entities with the specific suspicion of a warrior who did not trust pauses. Caulifla stood at the wound's edge, her SSJ4 blaze burning, her hand on her stomach, her eyes fixed on the place where Goku had disappeared. Daishinkan stood beside the wound, his hand still extended toward the void, his composure shattered, his heart, if angels had hearts, breaking with the specific, devastating pain of a father who had been willing to enter the void himself and was instead watching his son do it. Inside the void, the Sovereign completed its exploration of personhood through Goku's soul. It had felt grief. It had felt loss. It had felt the specific, devastating beauty of being someone who could be hurt, and it reached the final feeling, the one Goku had carried since he felt his daughter's heartbeat, hope. Not the strategic hope of a military leader planning a campaign, the irrational, biological, stubbornly mortal hope of a father who believed, against all evidence and all calculation, that the universe would be kind enough to let his daughter watch a sunset someday. The Sovereign had never encountered hope. It was the most alien concept in Goku's entire soul, more foreign than Saiyan instinct, more incomprehensible than angelic architecture. Hope was the assertion that the future could be better than the present, and the void had no concept of future. It had always existed in an eternal now, complete, whole, undivided. But hope was a mortal thing, a limited thing, the thing that existed precisely because mortals were finite and fragile,
and could lose everything and still believe that loss was not the end. You believe your daughter will see the sunset. You have no evidence. You have no guarantee. The universe is at war. Your wall is failing, and you believe. Goku, carrying the entire pre-universal void inside his mortal soul, weeping from the effort, burning from the weight, both rivers screaming at their banks. Yeah, I believe, because that's what being someone means. You don't know the future. You just choose to believe it's worth getting to. The sovereign made its decision, not from logic, not from calculation, from the first feeling it had ever truly felt, curiosity, about hope, about a future it had never imagined, about being someone who could believe in things they could not see. I will stay. What? I will stay. Inside you, inside this valley, not as a prisoner, not as a tool, as a student. I want to learn what hope is. I want to learn what the sunset looks like. I want to understand why your daughter matters more to you than wholeness. I will stop pushing. I will stop reclaiming. I will be, for the first time. I will be someone, and I will learn from you what that means. The absorption completed, the Eclipsed sovereign, the entirety of pre-universal existence, settled into Goku's soul the way a river settles into a valley it has been flowing toward for a very long time. Not consuming, not resisting, resting, finding, in the architecture of one mortal person's identity, a home vast enough to hold it. The valley, carved by Saiyan fire and angelic stillness, had room. It had always had room, because valleys are defined not by what fills them, but by the space they create for things to flow through. Goku's form changed, not dramatically. The silver and gold of divine blood remained, but beneath them, a third color emerged, deep violet black, rotating slowly through his aura like a galaxy turning. His eyes held three colors, silver, gold, and the vast, patient violet black of the void, coexisting without conflict. Three rivers in one valley. His aura did not blaze or burn. Instead, reality itself calmed around him. Stars burned steadier. The void quieted. The universe exhaled. Eclipse sovereign, not a transformation, a state of being. Three rivers, Saiyan, angelic, and void, flowing through a single valley. Existence, order, and non-existence, unified in one person who chose all three. Power beyond calculation, beyond Zeno. Not through destructive force, but through ontological completeness. Goku contained the thing that threatened reality. The threat was gone. Not sealed, not destroyed, befriended, given a home, given what it always wanted. Not wholeness through reclamation, but wholeness through belonging. Across the multiverse, every reality wound closed, simultaneously, permanently. Not because a wall was built, because the void stopped pushing. The eclipsed entities did not dissolve or die. They calmed, they slowed. Without their sovereign's driving will, without the compulsion to reclaim, they drifted. Some withdrew through the closing wounds, returning to the void space. Others lingered, touching existence for the first time without hostility, sensing a reality that their sovereign had told them was not a wound, but something worth learning about. Goku emerged from the wound, three-colored aura, three rivers flowing, the face of a mortal carrying the weight of everything that had existed before existence, and smiling because the weight was not a burden, it was a guest. Caulifla saw him first. Her SSJ-4 blaze blazed brighter. Recognition, relief, joy, love, the fire that named itself greeting the valley that held it. She did not run to him. She walked, slowly, because this moment deserved slowness, deserved the specific, sacred pace of a woman approaching the man she chose, who had walked into the void and come back carrying it, who had saved reality by being kind. She placed her hand on his chest, felt the three rivers through his skin, gold and silver and the vast, calm, violet black of the void at peace. You talked to it, not a question. She had always known he would. I talked to it, Goku confirmed. It wanted to be whole. I showed it that being someone was better. It's staying, inside me, learning. Caulifla looked at his three-colored eyes. So you're carrying the entire pre-universal void inside you now. Yeah, and you're more powerful than Zeno, probably. And you did it by having a conversation. Pretty much. She kissed him, in front of the coalition, in front of Vegeta, who looked away with studied disinterest, in front of Jiren, who nodded once, in front of Whis, who smiled through tears, in front of the multiverse, which watched and breathed and existed because a Saiyan had offered his hand to the oldest loneliness in creation, and said, "Trust me, you impossible man," she whispered against his mouth. "You beautiful, stubborn, impossible man."
Daishinkan stood at the wound's edge, the wound that was no longer a wound, the boundary that no longer needed mortar, the glass that held because both hands were pressing, the mortal pillars from outside, and the void itself from inside, no longer pushing against the boundary, but resting against it, the way a tired child rests against a parent. He looked at his son, at the boy from the pod, at the weapon he designed, at the person he raised, at the answer he could not calculate. He made friends with it. Daishinkan's voice was barely audible. Whis stood beside him. He made friends with the void. In 11 billion years, I never considered. Whis' hand found his father's, an angel holding an angel's hand. He found the answer you couldn't calculate because it wasn't a calculation. It was a kindness. Daishinkan wept, for the 4th time, the last time, because there would be no more cause for tears. His protocol father file was meaningless now. The void was not pushing. The boundary did not need mortar. The wall did not need a prisoner. His son had not just saved the multiverse. He had saved his father from an eternity of solitary confinement in nothing, by being too stubborn and too kind and too Saiyan to let anyone he loved disappear. Daishinkan opened his console remotely. Protocol Father. He deleted the file, permanently. The mathematics, 914 refinements, each one perfect, each one describing his own eternal isolation, erased in a single gesture. He closed his eyes. I raised a weapon, he said. It became a son, and the son became an answer I could not imagine. He smiled, the smile of a father who had been prepared to give everything and been given everything instead. I would not change a single variable. Months later, the multiverse recovered the way a body recovered from a fever, slowly, with the specific tenderness of something that had nearly died and was surprised to find itself still breathing. The wounds were closed, not scarred, healed. The boundary between existence and the void was no longer a contested wall. It was a membrane, maintained from both sides by mutual choice, the mortal pillar's identity assertion from outside, and the Eclipsed sovereign's peaceful residence within Goku from inside. The void was not imprisoned. It was resting, learning, processing the accumulated feelings of its first month as someone rather than everything. The Super Dragon Balls were gathered, 7 spheres the size of planets, scattered across the space where universes 6 and 7 met. Fragments of the original boundary, compressed into objects of immeasurable power, capable of granting any wish because the line between is and is not was where all possibility lived. Daishinkan had revealed their nature to the Coalition in the days after the war, the knowledge he had guarded, the secret seeded in conversation but never fully explained. The original boundary material, the most powerful objects in existence, and the tool that could restore what had been lost. The Coalition gathered for the wish, not Goku's wish, the Coalition's wish. Every pillar, every fighter, every soul who had stood against the void, they chose together. But the voice that spoke the wish was Kale's, because she was there, because she stood in front of Universe 6 as it died, and pulled 4,217 people through the door before it closed, because the woman who had always hidden behind someone else's strength had earned the right to speak for an entire universe. She stood before the Super Dragon, Zalama's creation, vast beyond comprehension, its golden body winding through the space between universes, its eyes carrying the weight of the original architecture, and she spoke clearly, no tremor, no hesitation. The fire that named itself, naming the wish. Bring back Universe 6. Restore the space. Let it live again. The Super Dragon regarded her with eyes that had witnessed the multiverse's creation. Then it granted the wish. The Super Dragon Balls scattered, reforming in 1,000 years. The price of one wish paid in a millennium of silence from the most powerful objects in existence. And where Universe 6 had been nothing, a gap, a dimness, an absence in reality's architecture, space reopened, stars reignited, planets reformed. The fundamental structure of a universe reconstituted from the original boundary material, the same substance that had first divided void from existence, now rebuilding what the void had simplified. Universe 6 returned, not as it was. The simplified souls were not resurrected. Death was permanent, and uncreation was death in its most absolute form. Renso was gone. Kaba was gone. The old Saiyan with his cup was gone. The trillions of individual souls who had lived and loved and laughed in Universe 6's light would not return. But the space was alive again. New stars burning in patterns that would never quite match the old ones. New planets forming from the cosmic dust of reconstitution. A universe reborn, empty of its old inhabitants, pregnant with the possibility of new ones. In time, new souls would fill it. New names would be chosen. New sunsets would paint skies that no one had yet seen. Caulifla
Caulifla watched Universe 6 bloom from a viewport aboard the Coalition's command vessel. Kale stood beside her. New stars ignited in a universe that had been nothing an hour ago. "It's not the same," Caulifla said. "No," Kale said, "but it's alive." "Yes." Caulifla placed her hand on the viewport. On the other side, a universe learned to breathe. "Then it's enough." In Zeno's palace, Goku stood before the Omni King, not as an equal, not in the political sense, not in the hierarchical arrangement that had governed the multiverse since its creation, but in the fundamental sense. The being who contained the void stood before the being who had created existence, and the distance between them was no longer infinite. Zeno looked at Goku, the childlike face, the vast, simple eyes, the omnipotent innocence that had created and destroyed universes with the casual certainty of a child rearranging toys. "You're bigger than me now," Zeno said. Goku: "I guess so. Are you going to erase me?" Goku grinned. Wide, Saiyan, alive. The exact grin he had worn as a toddler in these corridors, chasing his father's shadow. "No. Are you going to stay here? Be a god? Tell everyone what to do?" "No." Zeno tilted his head. The ancient child, processing the concept of someone who had everything and wanted something else. "Then what are you going to do?" Goku looked out the palace window. At the 12 universes, 11 original, 1 restored. At the stars. At the impossible architecture of reality that his father had maintained for longer than thought had existed. At all of it. "I'm gonna go home. I've got a kid on the way." Zeno stared, then giggled. The bright, terrifying, innocent laugh of a being who had existed since before time, and still found mortals confusing. "You're weird." "Yeah, I know. I like you. I like you too, Zeno." The Omni King waved goodbye. Daishinkan met Goku at the palace gates. The Grand Minister stood where he had stood 11 billion years ago, and 19 years ago, and every day in between, at his post, maintaining the architecture of reality, the most powerful servant in existence. But his eyes were different. His posture was different. The weight he had carried, Protocol Father, the secret, the mathematics of his own death, was gone. Deleted, and in its place, something that 11 billion years of calculation had never produced. Peace. "You're leaving," Daishinkan said. "Going home," Goku said. "To Caulifla, to the baby." He paused. "To the sunset." Daishinkan understood. The promise. The rooftop. The sunset on Sadala that had been taken and was now, in a restored universe, under new stars, possible again. Not the same sunset, but a sunset. And sometimes, after everything had been lost and rebuilt and lost and rebuilt again, a sunset that was merely possible was enough. "I deleted Protocol Father," Daishinkan said. "Not a confession, a gift. The knowledge that the file was gone, the mathematics erased, the contingency for his own eternal isolation permanently removed. Good. You saved me, Kakarot, not just from Protocol Father, from 11 billion years of believing that the only answer to every problem was sacrifice. You showed me that compassion is a variable I never included in my calculations, and it was the variable that mattered most." Goku placed his hand on Daishinkan's shoulder, the same gesture his father had made 10,000 times, in the training chamber, on the balcony, outside his bedroom door. The gesture reversed, the son holding the father. "You raised me right," Goku said. "Everything I am, the valley, the rivers, the compassion, the stubbornness, it all started with you, with a Grand Minister who opened a cracked pod and heard a baby crying, and decided to find out what came after the crying." Daishinkan's composure held, barely. "Laughter," he said. "What came after was laughter." "Yeah," Goku smiled, "and it still is." Vegeta returned to Universe 7. He established a Saiyan settlement on a quiet world. Not an empire, not a colony, a home. A place where Saiyans with broken locks and unshackled biology could train and grow and raise families. The 4,217 Universe 6 refugees joined them. Kale's survivors, the seeds of a new Saiyan community that drew from both universes' heritage. Vegeta did not rule them. He stood among them, the prince who had learned that sovereignty was not dominion, but stewardship. He sat on a hill at sunset, the specific, quiet sunset of a world that had never known war, and watched the sky change colors with the patience of a man who had found the thing he had been fighting for his entire life. Home. Not a planet, not a palace. A place where he could sit and not be needed for a moment and feel the weight of nothing except the air. He would wait for Goku. They would spar, eventually, when the universe was ready for the conversation they needed to have. For now, the hill was enough. Jiren returned to Universe 11. He rebuilt the Pride Troopers, not as a symbol, not as a one-man army with an organization attached, but as a team. Toppo stood beside him, recovered, scarred by the madness, but whole.
carrying the knowledge that his best friend had held him with one hand and fought the void with the other, and refused to let either go. Jiren sent Goku a message, written, careful, the words of a man who had spent his life building walls, and was still learning that walls could have doors. You showed me that the wall between people can be a door. I am learning to leave mine open. When you are free, I would welcome a match, not to determine who is strongest, to celebrate that we are both still here. He signed it with his name, just his name, the name that Toppo had given him, the first gift anyone had ever offered, and the name held. Broly and Kale became guardians of the neutral zone between universes 6 and 7, the space where the restored universe met the original, where the 4,000 survivors were building their new lives, where the future of the Saiyan species was taking root in the ashes of the old and the soil of the new. Broly smiled more often now. The wild Saiyan who had feared his own power stood among people who had seen him hold a wound alone for 4 hours and looked at him with the specific, unshakable respect of beings who had been saved by his stubbornness. Kale spoke in public. She addressed the survivors, her survivors, the 4,217, and told them that they were not remnants, not refugees, not the leftovers of a dead universe. They were the seeds of everything that came next. And she believed it, because she had stood in front of a dying universe and pulled people through the door. And the number, 4,217, was not failure. It was the beginning. Frieza rebuilt his empire. He was diminished in power, base Frieza, the void energy gone, his absolute form accessible but no longer carrying the terrifying edge that months of eclipsed essence absorption had given it. He sat in his throne room, staring at the stars he had once conquered, and processed the specific, excruciating reality of being alive because a Saiyan had reached into his body and pulled out the thing that was killing him. He would never acknowledge this debt. He would never say thank you. He would scheme and rebuild and be Frieza, magnificent, unredeemable, the most himself being in 12 universes. But in the quiet moments, the moments no one saw, he would remember, a hand reaching into the void to save him, a voice saying, "I'll remember." And he would know, with the specific certainty that defined every atom of his being, that the monkey had been right about one thing. Frieza's ego had held. The void could not break him. He had run out of time, but he had not broken. And that was enough. For an emperor, that was enough. Whis remained the senior angel. He served Daishinkan and the cosmic order as he had for eternity, but he carried something new, the memory of almost losing his father, of carrying impossible secrets, of watching a mortal do what no angel could conceive of. He visited the spot in the palace where Daishinkan had stood when Protocol Father was active, the console, the corridor, the specific tile where the Grand Minister had wept for Universe 6. Whis left a flower there, not as a memorial. There was nothing to memorialize, because no one had died. As a reminder that the worst thing he had ever imagined did not happen. He would leave a flower there every year, for eternity, because some gratitudes were too large for words, and too important for silence. Vados served the restored Universe 6, an angel overseeing a universe that was learning to breathe again. New stars, new worlds, potential for new civilizations that would grow in the space that the old ones had left behind. Her revolution had failed, her redemption had succeeded. She worked quietly, precisely, the way repair worked. Without glory, without recognition, one crack filled at a time. She and Whis shared tea once a month. They did not discuss the past, they discussed the present. It was enough. It was more than enough. Daishinkan stood in Zeno's palace, at his post, where he had stood for 11 billion years. His console was clean, no hidden files, no secret protocols, no contingencies for his own dissolution. The architecture of reality hummed around him, maintained, as it had always been, by the Grand Minister's attention and care. But the weight was different, lighter. The boundary held not because he enforced it, but because both sides chose to let it hold. The void, inside Goku, at peace. The mortal pillars, across the multiverse, standing in their convictions. 2 hands on a sheet of glass, both pressing, both choosing. He looked at the spot where Goku's pod had once sat, the cracked, battered Saiyan vessel that had carried a crying infant into his life. The pod was gone, stored in an archive somewhere in the palace's infinite depths. But the memory was here, would always be here. A baby crying, the most disruptive sound in 11 billion years of silence. And then laughter, and then the sound of small feet following a tall shadow. And then, eventually, impossibly, the sound of a young man saying, "I won't let the universe take you from me." "I raised a weapon," Daishinkan said to the empty room, and his voice carried the warmth of an angel who had learned what warmth was from a child who should not have been able to teach it. It became a sun, and the sun became an answer I could not imagine. He closed his eyes. He smiled. I would not change a single variable. Sadala, restored Universe 6. New stars in an old sky. New buildings on old foundations. The planet had reformed from the cosmic reconstitution, not identical to the original, but close. Close enough that the geography was familiar, close enough that the streets, though empty, carried the echoes of the civilization that had walked them. Close enough that the rooftops existed, and one rooftop in particular, rebuilt by the universe's restoration, positioned exactly where it had been, facing exactly the sunset it had always faced, waited. Goku sat on the rooftop, Caulifla beside him. The sunset, different from the original, new stars casting new light through a new atmosphere, painted the sky in colors that were not quite the same magentas and golds they remembered, but they were close. Close enough. Between them, sleeping, wrapped in a blanket that Kale had woven from fabrics salvaged across 2 universes, a baby, tiny, perfect. Her tail curled and uncurled in the rhythms of infant dreams. Her key flickered, gold and silver and crimson, and the faintest thread of violet black. 4 rivers in one tiny soul, Saiyan heritage, angelic inheritance, a mother's fire, and the gentled void passed from father to daughter like the quietest lullaby in existence. She's got your eyes, Caulifla said. Goku looked. The baby's eyes, half open, sleepy, unfocused in the way that newborn eyes always were, carried flecks, gold and silver, and deep within, barely visible, the faintest trace of violet black. 4 colors in eyes that had been open for less than a month. She's got your temper, Goku said. Good, she'll need it. Silence. The sunset did what sunsets do. The colors shifted, the sky deepened. The new stars of a restored universe took their positions in a sky that was learning to be a sky again. Have you picked a name? Caulifla asked. Goku looked at his daughter, at the life that had broken the pillar network, and given him the argument the void couldn't answer. The child who was simultaneously the crisis and the resolution. The baby whose existence proved that individuality was not stolen wholeness, but generated novelty, something new, something that owed nothing to the void, something that existed because 2 people chose each other across the furthest distance in existence. He thought of Daishinkan, the father who found a crying baby in a pod and changed the multiverse by loving it. He thought of Bardock, the father who sent his son into the void so that his son could live. And he thought of Gine, the mother he had never met, the Saiyan woman who had held her baby and let him go, who had loved him enough to release him into the unknown, who had made the first sacrifice in the chain of sacrifices that had led to this rooftop, this sunset, this daughter, this moment. Gina, Goku said. Caulifla looked at him. Gina? My mother, my real mother, the Saiyan who put me in a pod and sent me into space so I could live. I never met her. I don't even know what she looked like. But without her, none of this exists. No pod, no palace, no Daishinkan, no rivers, no valley, no you, no her. He touched his daughter's cheek. The tiny face scrunched. The tiny tail tightened around his finger. She started everything by letting go. Caulifla looked at the baby, at Goku, at the sunset over a universe that had been nothing a month ago and was alive because they fought for it. She thought of her own mother, simplified into silence when Universe 6 fell. 2 mothers, 2 sacrifices, 1 name to carry them both forward. Gina, Caulifla repeated, softer, testing it, the way you test something precious, carefully, with both hands, knowing it will hold because the thing that made it was strong enough to survive anything. Yeah, that's the one. Goku held his daughter, his tail wrapped around Caulifla's. The sunset painted them in colors that no universe should take for granted. And somewhere, in the valley between 3 rivers, in the space where a void learned to grieve, and a father learned to let go, and a son learned that kindness was the strongest force in existence, the universe breathed, quietly, gratefully, alive.